Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are tonight's entertainment.
You are not in Kansas anymore. You are on Pandora.
No, I'm simply saying that life finds a way.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to The Film Jump. I'm your host, Jesse.
Co-host Chris.
This is episode 1.
Yeah.
It's
Official.
yeah. It's it's our first official episode. I mean, not really. We've done a couple already.
It was a way to give ourselves 2 dry runs to practice before we actually. So the episode 1 is amazing.
Yeah, we have check out episode -1, and then which is basically a spoiler-free review of Godzilla -1. Amazing movie.
Masterpiece.
Top 3 Godzilla, I think, for everybody out there, and some might say it's the best. And then episode 0 is basically our introduction episode, kind of ground zero, if you will. This is episode 1, where we're going to give you a little bit of news first, and then we're going to jump right into the topic, which is movies of the 90s. We're going to cover the 90s.
Yeah, we're children of the 90s, so what better place to start than the movies that not only we grew up on, but the movies that were just in and around our brains and eyes while we were toddlers, kids, just, growing up period, just the kind of stuff we were inundated with in the 90s. Just sort of watching day in and day out, or just being around, seeing the commercials, that's the decade you come up with. So
Very fun.
yeah, why wouldn't we talk about it first?
The movies that shaped us, if you will.
Yeah, the Genesis films. So
And after this episode, I think naturally we'll probably do an episode of the 2000s.
yeah, just keep it rolling. That's a nice way to get a few topics under our belt.
And before we started recording, we were looking at some of the movies of the 90s to get a refresher on some that were probably underlooked or not as remembered. And I gotta say, the 90s was much better than I can actually remember.
90s was stacked. A little bit of that is, the only movies anyone ever remembers from any year or decade are the good ones. Like the cream rises to the top. So naturally, all the stuff that was crap has been long forgotten. But you go down the list of either the top box office hits or just the films released, and it's like every other movie you mention is like, oh dang that movie, oh dang that movie, like wow that's a good one. It's like just feels like modern cinema would be absolutely would kill to have some of these lineups these days.
Yeah, and this is not to say that movies of the 70s and 80s were not good. Yeah. And I'm sure, children of the 80s would say that theirs was the best decade. And
yeah.
Maybe we're not here to say that, but we're just telling you the 90s was great.
And we're not even saying that the 90s was necessarily the best. We're just saying that the 70s and 80s were before we were born. Yep. So, they're not lesser. They just weren't as important to us. So we're starting with the 90s. We're 90s babies. So there we go.
Right. So before we jump into that, Chris, a little bit of news. Let's talk about the Godzilla Kong trailer that dropped. It dropped right after we posted our previous episode, or right before rather, so we didn't have time to record or talk about it. That's just our luck.
I used to always laugh when YouTubers would be like, oh, the news or the video or this always drops right after we record and whatnot. I'm like, man, what does it matter? What does it matter? And then, of course, it happens to us, and I'm like, oh, this is awful. The trailer dropped the day after we talked about it. But, it is what it is.
Yeah, if you know us or have listened to our previous episodes, you'll know that we're diehard Godzilla fans. Totally biased. We acknowledge it. We accept it. We wear it like a badge of honor. So the trailer drops, and first of all, it's a sequel to Godzilla vs. Kong.
Yeah.
The running series of the American Godzilla movies that started with Godzilla 2014. And then you had Kong Skull Island, Godzilla King of the Monsters, and then Godzilla vs. Kong, and now Godzilla Kong, The New Empire.
Yeah, for anyone, there might be a little bit of confusion on exactly how that X is supposed to be pronounced. It seems from what the director has spoken, the name in interviews called it Godzilla Kong, The New Empire. It's a very Japanese thing. You'll see a lot of Japanese anime titles that have an X in between two terms. They're like Hunter X Hunter, Spy X Family. They are spoken as Hunter Hunter and Spy Family. It's almost like a hyphen in the way that they structure their titles. So it's kind of pulling that from the way that the Japanese would name something. Clearly, they want these films to appeal to Japan as well as the U.S. So the until further notice, it is pronounced Godzilla Kong: The New Empire.
Yeah, I guess if you really want to, you can think of it maybe like there's a comma there, or if you were to call somebody out, like two people by name, Jesse, Chris, come over here, do what you got to do, but it is Godzilla Kong.
Exactly. It's almost a hyphen, and like no one would shoot you if you were to say Godzilla and Kong. Like it's serving the same purpose grammatically or in terms of the words and phonetic.
And to be fair, the Godzilla and Kong was on the crew merch.
Yeah, that was the working title. So, they almost went with it. Would have been simpler, but I think they're going for like branding. I think there might be, if this is Godzilla Kong: The New Empire, I think a direct sequel might be Godzilla Kong subtitle something else.
Destroy all monsters.
It might become a sort of Godzilla Kong is the sort of unified franchise as they go one film at a time, which would be kind of cool.
Yeah, the director did say something about like, we had them both in Godzilla vs. Kong. How do you come back from that? It's kind of like having your Avengers movie and then doing a solo movie after. It's kind of not as exciting.
Yeah, and I'm one thing, the MonsterVerse isn't as numerous as the MCU, but like the MCU doing the like, team up movie, solo movie, that kind of formula. I like that the MonsterVerse kind of goes one movie at a time, and I like that they didn't have it kind of stuck in their head that like, after Godzilla vs. Kong, we need to do a solo Kong movie and a solo Godzilla movie and see how that goes. It's like, everyone just wants them to see them together anyway, so why not just keep the linear franchise going forward one film at a time and feature them both?
Yeah, exactly. So the trailer, it's pretty bonkers. It definitely what goes into the fantastical realm, which I think, look, we've seen some discourse on Twitter X, and I kind of figured it would be like that because right now we have Godzilla -1, which is the quintessential Godzilla type of movie, very serious, very, very good. But then you have the MonsterVerse, and now we're getting into the ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not the greatest time to have dropped like a kind of bonkers, wild adventure Godzilla movie, because we just got a really, really, really great serious Godzilla movie, really, really great dark Godzilla movie that everyone's loving and singing the praises of. It'd be like trying to drop something like Batman Returns, a year after The Dark Knight came out. Like Batman Returns is legit, and it's even dark in its own ways, and it's all kinds of awesome in its own right, but it's like right on the heels of The Dark Knight, it would feel totally odd. But these are two different incarnations of the character. They don't share continuity. And, I was all aboard the style that Wingard brought to Godzilla vs. Kong. I felt like the MonsterVerse, I liked the serious place it started out with, but I felt like they finally found their footing of like a sort of sci-fantasy type of feel, like getting their own language down pat, not just being a typical giant monster movie, not just being a disaster movie with giant monsters. Like they were into like they're making monster movies now, like monster storytelling. And I wanted to see more of that. I'm like, I wanted the epic Lord of the Rings scale, Hollow Earth fantasy, like huge sweeping landscapes that make the monsters look small. Like I want that scale to be out of the ordinary and really out there. So it's going hard down that aisle, and I'm all for it, especially because we just got such a good, serious, grounded Godzilla movie. It's like Godzilla is also this more wild, metal kind of balls to the wall kind of action adventure fantasy epic, and Hollywood does that better than anybody. So I say let them have it. And
as you said before, there's a different flavor Godzilla movie for everybody. So we can have it all, and that's the beauty, especially being like a diehard Godzilla fan.
Yeah,
I like all of it. Like, give me your Oscar-winning type movie, and then give me your blockbuster type. And
worth noting, anytime Godzilla's ever started off any sort of era or reboot, sort of serious, whether it be G54 or The Return of Godzilla in '84, usually once you get like 2 or 3 films removed from the sort of dark, serious reboot, you're going kind of wild. King Kong versus Godzilla is a very comedic movie, and it was the 3rd movie in the franchise. 2 movies after the '80s reboot, where they went dark and gritty again, two movies later, there's time travel and mechs and things of that nature. So it's like stuff never stays very grounded and very serious for very long in any version of the Godzilla franchise. So it's not, it's par for the course for them to start off in a really serious way, and then eventually, like over the course of several films, you're in a whole new kind of realm of reality where it's like, this is a world full of monsters and it's playing by its own rules. Well, and I'm willing to bet right now that if we do, by some miracle, get a sequel to Godzilla -1, I'm willing to bet money there's going to be another monster in there, and it will be serious. It'll be a serious movie, but I guarantee you they kind of shift Godzilla ever so slightly into that
slightly anti-hero role that he kind of always kind of lands in for most fans.
Yeah, and here's the thing: serious Godzilla can be done well, and we've seen multiple movies that do it well. But that same kind of tone and style, the minute you try to start to, because it's so inherently ridiculous as it is, it's always like a knife's edge away from feeling like a totally ridiculous concept. Anyway, it's a giant monster, giant dinosaur, whatever you call it. So it's like it's inherently silly by nature. It can be depicted in a very serious way. But the minute you start to go beyond one anomalous creature and you start to say, oh, there's another creature and another creature, another creature. Oh, there's these little fairies that worship these things. Oh, there's some on the island and there's some in the ocean and there's this. And now they're going to fight to each other. And some of them are talking to each other.
And now they're from outer space.
Exactly. The minute you start to explore anything beyond one anomaly of one giant creature that just so happens to exist being fought with conventional weapons, the minute you go beyond that, you're automatically kind of in another area of suspension of disbelief that you can't keep denying the silly nature of it, because then it's going to feel like total horse crap the whole time. You got to kind of lean into it and embrace it. Godzilla franchise has always done it. This is not anything particularly new, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. So anyways, we'll bring it back in a little bit with specifically the trailer. I think probably the most crazy thing is not even so much the more Hollow Earth. We have our new villain of the movie, and we're gonna, I think we should avoid like names and stuff like that for anybody who wants to remain like ultra spoiler free.
Yeah.
But one thing is like you see King Kong. You know, I keep saying King Kong. That's just classic. They only refer to him as Kong in the MonsterVerse.
It's a weird, nebulous, semi-public domain, semi-copyrighted. This is a legally protected version of the character that they can then say is theirs. So there's some reasons behind that.
Regardless, so Kong seems to have the Infinity Gauntlet, as some people have joked around.
Yeah, some kind of arm brace.
But yeah,
there's theories that it's a weapon, that it's like a fix of a broken arm, or maybe a little bit of both.
We'll see. I'm not going to speculate because I don't want to figure it out.
It looks cool aesthetically though. If
bonkers.
It feeds into that synthwave metal cyberpunkish kind of like, you know, neon colors and just wild, like sort of its own genre of storytelling.
And I know we get definite like Godzilla vs. Megalon vibes, like with
There
a lot of the
seems to
stuff
be-
underneath, you know, in the Hollow Earth and the Iwi people.
Yeah, a subterranean culture was first seen in Godzilla vs. Megalon. I'm not saying Megalon is going to show up, but this is certainly... You can't make a Godzilla movie without intentionally or unintentionally having about a dozen allusions to other things that have come before in the Godzilla mythos, just because it's been done so many times in so many ways. So like a subterranean culture, it's like not the first time we've seen that in a Godzilla movie.
Right. I think the most discourse that I've seen for this trailer that dropped is our main guy, Godzilla.
Yeah, Godzilla's design, like everything about it. And here's the thing, like it's slightly...
Well, let's tell the listeners.
Break it down.
So Godzilla has gone through, you know, tiny little changes here and there. The biggest, at least in the MonsterVerse, has been his spikes and the size of his head and his claws and feet, right? And the tail.
And kind of how bulky his body is overall.
Right, but he looks like the same silhouette almost. You know, that's the same Godzilla.
If you weren't paying attention and you see him in Godzilla King of the Monsters and you're like, does he look how he did in the last movie? Most people would be like, yeah, it looks the same to me.
Yeah, right.
You know, you're not, unless you see it side by side to really compare, most people have not really noticed any changes of Godzilla so far.
Right. So this one, it's an evolved form. We will say that. So I expect to see the traditional Godzilla versus Kong and Godzilla 2019 version prior to whenever he does this transformation.
Yeah, I like to think that we'll get at least one scene or sequence of that before we get this new form, or maybe not. You know,
or maybe he devolves after.
Yeah,
who knows?
maybe. You know, you think that something like the reveal of a new form is maybe a third act thing, but for all we know, that's like right off the cuff, and this is to establish the status quo of Godzilla. You know, maybe the last several years he's been hibernating or rejuvenating or whatever, and then the status quo right off the bat is this new form. Who knows?
Well, anyways, he's pink. Well, okay, let's be more specific.
Magenta.
Yeah.
And something tells me that if enough people are trolling about the pink on the internet, something tells me that when they get that final color grading in and the final renders and all that stuff, something tells me it'll be ever tweaked ever so slightly to be a bit more reddish
purple
to
avoid the pink.
than pink. Something tells me that might happen. But
well, there's a reason for that.
Go. Yes, there is. Go on.
There's a reason for that. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like the scale of the lighting of energy, and when you get into gamma radiation, as the hue is magenta. Can you explain that?
It's like a color spectrum. It's like a radioactive color spectrum kind of rays thing. I'm no expert on this. I saw a diagram, but essentially the highest kind of form, or the most potent form, or most powerful form, it's kind of in that magenta range. So there's at least a sort of visual logic behind it, which is this is the most powerful and radioactive Godzilla we've seen so far. So he's kind of got the highest yield of radioactivity going on. Something to that effect. Like, there's a logic behind it. But beyond that, aesthetically, it's sort of... it's a little evocative of the Godzilla 2000 design, which had some purplish spines.
Very jagged and pointy, rigid,
and a little bit leaner, which is a little bit Final Wars vibes. You know, Final Wars went for a really sort of lean and mean look. This isn't to that extent, but the proportions are a little bit more.
I would think comparatively from where he was. You know, there was a running joke that the American Godzilla in the MonsterVerse was a little fat and chunky at some points.
Yeah, he's been doing his cardio.
There's a scene in the trailer where they team up together, Kong and Godzilla, and they're like full sprint.
Yeah.
Look, we'll save the argument debate for is the scale right?
I think it looks awesome.
Time? Yeah, it looks cool to be fun, but he is thinning out like.
Yeah,
he's very different.
Well, and it can only hint at the kind of action sequences and movements of agility and stuff that Godzilla's probably going to be doing in this movie. But I like that people are seeing the sort of connections to Godzilla 2000 and Final Wars. This is purely coincidence, but Godzilla 2000 came out in Japan in 1999 and Final Wars came out in 2004. So those are two designs that are celebrating a 25th and 20th year anniversary here in 2024.
Always with the trivia.
So a nice way to pay tribute to those designs on little anniversaries of their debuts.
Well, and here's the thing, you know, it's still the same general design.
Yeah.
They've made him a little bit more spiky where it counts.
He's got some ridges.
The glow goes up to the top of the crest of his head a little bit. He is the same Godzilla, and that's clear. It's just, the color.
They clearly wanted him to be able to move a little bit more with a bit more agility, and they clearly wanted his arms to be a bit more pronounced and thus like able to grapple or slash or whatever punch. Who knows, whatever they got to do. But they want something like people can say, oh, it's a bit more like anthropomorphized humanoid or whatever, but it's like, well, that's how you get really interesting dynamic fight scenes. Sorry, but he's not going to be doing kung fu moves, but you want him to be able to grapple and maneuver and not just be stuck in that sort of dinosaur pose. So it's a give and a take. There's pros and cons, but it's like if you want like really dynamic and unique fight scenes and action sequences and melee combat, you kind of got to adjust the design to where that looks feasible.
Yeah, that's true. And here's the thing. If it's not your cup of tea, you have Godzilla -1.
Yeah.
As of right now, it doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah.
You have people saying like the Holy Trinity right now is Godzilla 54, the original, Shin Godzilla 2016, and now Godzilla -1.
Very much so. Coincidentally, the highest rated entries on Rotten Tomatoes. Not that Rotten Tomatoes means everything, but those are the three highest rated on Rotten Tomatoes for Godzilla films.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. It's not like none of these versions are denying the existence of these other versions. It'd be one thing if Toho had resigned themselves to the fact that the MonsterVerse was the only Godzilla we were getting now, and they weren't going to make any more until the MonsterVerse was done, and so this is all anyone had. It's like every time Legendary drops one of these new epic adventure sci-fantasy MonsterVerse movies, Toho's chambering up one of these very serious reimaginings, reboots. Shin Godzilla felt like, oh my gosh, that's as great as a modern reboot could be, doing it serious. And then -1 comes out and it's a period piece, and it's like, oh my god, that just raises the bar so much higher. Like Toho, for me, I think serious and somber and dark and metaphorical Godzilla should be best left to Toho and Japanese filmmakers. That's their perspective. That's like their historical context and baggage. I'm not sure I'd be very hyped to see a Japanese studio's perspective on like a 9/11 metaphor. Not saying it couldn't be good, but like maybe American filmmakers would be best suited to handle that. So America, we make big Hollywood blockbusters, and by all means, give us big, awesome Godzilla blockbusters, because that's just as much, if not more so, part of the legacy and identity as the serious films are.
And they have the budget too for the more serious take, where you have more time with characters and less action, so to speak. Whereas the budgets for Hollywood movies, hundreds of millions,
Infinite.
kind of lends more to that bombastic, crazy, wild spectacle roller coaster, as some of the maestros in the business say. So yeah, look, if you want like a full breakdown, obviously go watch the trailer. It's wild. We're not going to get into it. Like there's Baby Kong now, as a lot of people are calling Diddy Kong.
Yeah.
Spoiler. Apparently, Titanus Doug is going to return, which is going to be cool.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a little character, a little monster from Godzilla vs. Kong.
Was in literally one shot in Godzilla vs. Kong, became a meme. Everyone loves him. But yeah, this trailer, like, I don't know if it's the best thing ever or if it's the best thing ever, because I think it's awesome. Like this, after seeing Godzilla vs. Kong and loving it the way I did, I was like, I want kind of more of this. Like, I want to lean into that. Give me that sort of synthwave album cover. Give me that like metal as hell kind of like Kong with an axe, and now he's got a robotic arm brace, and Godzilla's glowing magenta and has crystal spines, and they're running full pace at other monsters. Like, get me that wild stuff, because it's not like you're going to be able to see it anywhere else.
Right. And let's be fair, it seems like a natural progression from Godzilla vs. Kong.
It's been a step process. Yeah, if you go from G14 to this, huge evolution. But, if you watch the films in sequence, it is more or less a pretty natural stepping process into this wild world of the Hollow Earth that we're in now.
Well, as you said, it is par for the course. They naturally get this way. So anyways, that's basically kind of like how we feel. We both agree. Give us more of this, because this is what we want from our Hollywood crazy Godzilla movies.
Toho has the other style on lockdown. They've got us covered as far as that goes. So why would I want America to just imitate that?
It's like, do we want the same movie just with a different Godzilla design and in English?
Yeah, Godzilla 2014 3 times over. We got a great Godzilla 2014, so...
Right. All right, well, that'll about cover it for the news, because, we're diehard Godzilla fans, and, we could cover the box office and stuff like that, but I think the box office is pretty kind of right now.
The Marvels is going to finish as by far the lowest grossing MCU movie of all time. Even when you don't factor in things like 15 years of ticket price inflation since The Incredible Hulk came out, it's going to fall short of that box office by like $40 million, which is crazy.
Yeah, that's wild.
-1 is doing well in North America, so well that they've extended the 1-week box office run to a 2-week box office run, and are adding theaters for its second week. Yes. So it's going from like 2,300 to 2,500, which is a good indicator.
Not heard of like ever for a movie like this.
Not very common, especially for a foreign language film that's only available subtitled, to be adding screens and sort of almost gaining momentum. If the second weekend comes in and it manages to drop very small or hold even, or maybe even improve over the first weekend, that would be wild. If that happens, I would say not only expect the theater counts to continue to grow for the run to be extended, but they'd probably let it ride through the new year. They're probably like, you don't walk away from money on the table. Like, they'd be dumb not to. They didn't do it after the first week.
Right.
As long as the numbers are there to justify it and they don't feel like it will be detrimental to keep it lasting, they'll run it through the Christmas holiday.
Yeah, and we will be happy to see that happen for sure. Anything else at the box office? Anything else pretty interesting? I don't really think so.
This is kind of an off couple of weeks. Typically, you have your big Thanksgiving movies that come out, and then you're waiting for your big sort of end of December film. So this is usually a week corridor, which is why it was a good spot to drop -1.
Yeah, and an episode I think we're gonna do coming up relatively soon, probably in January. We'll look back at the 2023 year and give our top movies of the year. Oh, yeah. We have to wait till the year's over, because there's still.
Yeah. It'll be a top 10 list that goes to -1.
Yeah, right. So that'll be coming soon. So Chris, I think we can go ahead and jump into our topic for this this whole discussion today. The 90s.
Yeah.
Man.
We were born, so clearly that makes it better than many decades before and after.
Better than everybody else, better than every decade. It's just that's what it is.
Not really up for debate. That's kind of case closed. It's best because it spawned us. But one thing that was interesting, Matthew Vaughn, when he made X-Men First Class, he was it's set in the early '60s, and he had this great thing that he said that I hadn't really thought about how the first couple of years of any decade are sort of the afterglow and sort of rub off of the previous decade. You know, the early 60s are sort of like the late 50s kind of extended. And he was excited about doing sequels set further in the 60s because he was like, you know, a decade doesn't really find its own identity till like halfway through or near the end.
Right.
And he, of course, never directed the sequels to First Class, but he was excited to make more of a pure 60s movie because a movie set in the early 60s is a little late 50s light, only early 60s coming in. And so and I think that's true of like when you look at movies and cinema and various things about pop culture, I think that's kind of true. You know, the 90s kicks off and you think about some of the biggest films of 89 and how they are sort of precursors to the kinds of films we were seeing in the early 90s. You know, we had Batman in 1989 and, you know, the number one movie in 1992, at least on the day I was born, was Batman Returns, the sequel. The Abyss came out in 1989 as one of the first major examples of a CGI creature being used in a sci-fi movie, and that's a little bit of a stepping stone to 1991's Terminator 2, you know, which was a big CGI breakthrough, which was a further stepping stone to later films that we're going to get into. And you know, 1990 had a movie like Tremors, which is like this great creature feature. And again, a bit of a stepstone to a very, very big and prominent creature feature that sort of helps define the decade of the 90s. So it's interesting to see the late 80s movies and how that kind of bleeds into the early 90s. And, you know, you watch a movie like a Reservoir Dogs or something like that, and it kind of has that, a little bit of that late 80s, the type of film you would see in the late 80s. And it's always interesting to see the early films of the decade and how that's kind of a bleed over from the late 80s.
Yeah. So are there any movies in particular, I think, that are worth going on about as far as like 90 to 91 and 92? Because, you know, I am eager to get to 1993.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was trying to cover a little bit here to kind of get us through the 91 and the 92s, you know, the Batman Returns, the Tremors, things of that nature, the Terminator 2s, you know.
I mean, just a rapid fire sum. Just in 1990 alone, reading off some of them: Home Alone, Total Recall, Goodfellas. You know, these are movies that are just,
and those are movies
classics.
also that if you were to tell people like to guess what year they came out in, some people might guess like 88 or 89 to kind of prove the point.
Right, exactly. You know, Dances with Wolves.
Yeah.
You know, all these incredible movies, and then you go fast forward to 1991, and you're getting a whole lot more. It's just, I don't think people realize how awesome the 90s were.
The 90s
as
were
far
pretty,
as movies go.
90s were pretty awesome. And I'm sure we'll be pleasantly surprised by some other decade, but as we go through the other decades. But certainly, I believe Silence of the Lambs was 90, 91, something like that, you know?
Yeah. And
which sets a tone for a whole kind of crime film thriller that you know, is kind of still popular to this day in some ways.
And forgive us if we forget a movie from the 90s that you love.
We're not here to mention everyone's favorite 90s movie. We're here to mention our favorite 90s movies.
Yeah. So, you know, 92, excellent year because just to let everybody know our age, that is the year we were born.
Yep, exactly. Yep, Batman Returns was the number one movie in theaters the day I was born. I think that's very cool. Aladdin came out that year, so like that's in the middle of that sort of post-Little Mermaid Disney Renaissance.
Good time for Disney cartoons.
Yeah, Aladdin was never my favorite growing up. You know, it was always The Lion King.
Yeah, Lion King all the way.
Each to their own. Basic Instinct, Reservoir Dogs, you know, these adult thrillers, kind of Quentin Tarantino getting his start. You want to talk about films like how many 90s movies are just like Tarantino knockoffs trying to do that kind of witty banter style dialogue. You know, just a lot of stuff that kind of just came in the wake of these early things. But, you know, we can agree that the big boom, if you had to pick a movie to at least define the first half of the 90s that would set the stage for the rest of the 90s, it's the one and only. You can introduce it.
It's got to be the classic Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park.
Yeah, 100%. On a few different levels. It became the biggest film of all time when it was released. It was a big budget, A-movie style creature feature monster movie, and it revolutionized the use of CGI in blockbuster cinema, using it for living, breathing creatures as opposed to one-off kind of visual effects like a water tentacle or liquid metal that was seen in stuff like The Abyss and Terminator. Those were groundbreaking movies, but you know, as they say in the making of documentaries for Jurassic Park, if you see those tentacle gooey things, you can kind of only imagine them as more of that. you see a T-Rex that's computer generated, and you can imagine that being a dragon, as it later would be in Dragonheart several years later. You can imagine it maybe one day being a human or some kind of other creature. Once you get flesh and blood digital characters, that opens the whole world up. And the 90s is defined by a ton of movies that would then imitate it. And the sort of children of Jurassic Park, someone else pointed this out, that it sort of splits into two different directions. You get the sort of A-list kind of visual effects driven blockbusters. Jurassic Park directly led to the 1998 Godzilla movie, directly sort of led to movies like Mighty Joe Young, to the abandoned remake of King Kong that was going to come in the late 90s. So there's a sort of A-list batch of sort of creature feature blockbuster movies. Your Independence Days and your Twisters are kind of cut from that same kind of A-list high concept kind of cloth. And then you have the sort of the B tier of like your straight to DV or straight to video, straight to TV, straight to home market kind of creature feature schlocky stuff, and like the lower tier where you get your stuff like your Anacondas and your Deep Blue Seas and things like that, like these sort of like A- movies or B+ movies where it's like they're taking the sort of
Deep Rising.
Yeah, Deep Rising. They're taking the sort of energy of the creature feature Jurassic Park, Science Gone Wrong sort of vibe, but they're doing it on a sort of B-movie scale, not at that like upper huge blockbuster A-list. But because Jurassic Park was so popular, those movies had a huge audience. There were plenty of people that they liked Jurassic Park, and then they would watch all of the stuff underneath it and in between. So it created this just wild areas of emulation in plot and in special effects execution.
Yeah, and we're not here so much to talk about why Jurassic Park is amazing, because I think it's obvious.
It could get a review of its own.
Yeah, and maybe one day we'll do that. That was a great year for Steven Spielberg as a director. Chris, tell everybody why else it was a great year for Spielberg.
So in the middle of June, he drops Jurassic Park. A special effects blockbuster, all ages extravaganza, becomes the highest grossing film of all time worldwide. And then in November, December, late toward the end of the year, he drops Schindler's List that goes on to win Best Picture. So it's not like, it would have been a unique achievement to make one movie that became the biggest movie of all time and won Best Director or Best Picture. But he did two different movies on two completely opposite ends of the spectrums, and he makes the most financially successful movie on one end and a hugely critically acclaimed and financially successful film on the other end. Nothing epitomizes the range that Spielberg has more than 1993.
I mean, I don't think you can name a better year for any one director.
I don't think you could.
I really think I think he holds a crown in that regard.
And I think it's almost, you can debate, is it more or less special that he did it with two different movies that were so different, or as opposed to doing this sort of one-size-fits-all movie that managed to do it all. I think it kind of does speak to the fact that, there are people that are massive, massive Jurassic Park fans who might not be really in the market for Schindler's List. Schindler's List is a great movie. Like, it's hard to say, like, I love Schindler's List. Like, it's a
tough watch.
It's a great movie to watch. It's like a great film, but it's tough to be like, oh my God, yeah, let's all sit down and watch Schindler's List. This is going to be such a good time. Yeah, pop the popcorn. We're putting in Schindler's List, Like, no, you're getting a glass of wine ready for Schindler's List or something like that. And so the fact that they were both so different almost speaks to the versatility that he has. And so...
Sorry to interrupt. Good.
Go ahead. No, you go.
I was going to say Schindler's List won 7 Academy Awards.
That's impressive.
And then Jurassic Park won at least one for the VFX.
Yeah, which there's no debate there.
I have to look it up to see if it won other things. But, imagine getting all that and winning Best Director, Best Picture, Best... that's like, hey, you had the best movie and you had the best blockbuster.
And that was where he took his sort of sabbatical. He didn't make another thing for about 4 years till he returned with The Lost World. He kind of went out on top there. But yeah, left a huge mark on the 90s. And moving forward, can't be understated. But moving forward to 94, we start to get the rise of a one Jim Carrey. Within 1 year, 1994, we've got The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, and Ace Ventura. I don't know if any sort of breakout comedian actor has ever come harder with 3 hits in 1 year like that.
That 1 year solidified him forever.
Yeah, there are actors that can't get those 3 levels of hits in an entire span of a career, and he comes out in 1 year and nails it.
Yeah, and again, I think comedy has kind of changed. Like, if you were to drop those 3 movies today, they would be probably not appreciated as much.
Maybe it doesn't all land the same way.
Right,
Maybe
right.
it hasn't aged so perfectly, but they're not. It's not like those are all the same movies. There's similar Jim Carrey style performance in all of them, but it's not like they're three riffs on the same idea.
Right, right.
And I think he was in The Cable Guy prior to those. The Cable Guy was around there as well, so it's like he was just like it put him on the map just like that. And Jim Carrey's still going. Well, recently retired potentially maybe, but I mean even as recently as Dr. Robotnik in the two Sonic movies, he's still kind of doing his thing and being Jim Carrey, and it's kind of awesome. Yeah, Forrest Gump was also 94. 94 was a heavy hitter. Give us some of the top ones of 94.
Well, look, before I forget, I'd be remiss if we didn't backtrack back to 93 real quick, and I want to talk about our favorite Western movie.
Yes.
And I say our because here's the thing. We share a lot of the same movies. Like, that's just how it is. That's why we have our podcast. And
100%.
we'll probably mention that every single episode.
Yeah.
But Tombstone.
Tombstone's excellent. The
Kurt Russell, Bill Paxton.
The duo of Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer in that movie is like, it's a weird thing, but it's like, it's one of the best friend movies ever. It's like, those are two dudes that like, they are bros. They kill for each other. They take each other's places in shootouts. They've always got each other's backs. Like, that is a bro down.
Super quotable.
That is a bro down kind of a movie, and endlessly quotable. Endless great scenes. And I'm not really a Western guy very much at all. And I was loaned that movie, and I was just sitting with the DVD on the shelf, and my buddy was like, have you watched it yet? Have you watched it yet? I'm like, no, dude, no. He's like, please, just start it. Just put it in. I begrudgingly put it in as I'm like eating dinner. And within like 20 or 30 minutes, I'm like, okay, this is really, really good. Okay, I love this. And I think I watched it like back-to-back 2 days in a row. Just such a good Western.
Yeah. Okay, so back to 1994. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
I would have been upset had we not mentioned.
It is all right, yeah.
Because it is, you're right. Real quick, I grew up watching a lot of Western movies with my dad. He used to put on the old Bonanza and Gunsmoke.
My grandpa loved Gunsmoke.
And I'm very well versed in all the old Westerns, but for me, that will always be my favorite.
100%.
So back to 1994. So we talked about Jim Carrey and his amazing career, but I think the three heavy hitters of that year, we already talked about one, I think Pulp Fiction, Forrest Gump, and Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, those could almost eat the best picture for breakfast in many other years, and they were competing all against each other. Pulp Fiction puts Quentin Tarantino on the map like never before. It puts that whole style and genre that he sort of created in Reservoir Dogs, just sort of amplifies that. That's when it sort of goes mainstream.
Right.
You weren't having a lot of Reservoir Dogs imitators, but good Lord, you got a lot of Pulp Fiction imitators in the 90s.
And it's the renaissance of John Travolta as well. Puts him back on the map.
Yeah, kind of did that thing where Quentin Tarantino would sort of pluck some of these, not over the hill, but sort of maybe not quite in their prime anymore, actors and actresses, and put them in these roles and show like, no, they're still just as cool as they always were. They just haven't gotten the good stuff,
And it's interesting.
Kind of a break, not really a total breakout for Sam Jackson, but I mean, up to that point, Sam Jackson hadn't really been front and center.
Jurassic Park.
Yeah, he kind of gets nixed in Jurassic Park a little bit. It's a standout role, but I mean, it's not a starring role.
Hold on to your butts.
But come out of Pulp Fiction, it's like that's a Sam Jackson role there.
Yeah.
A lot of people could have played his part in Jurassic Park. I don't know if a ton of people could have played his part in Pulp Fiction.
Yeah. So what's interesting is Forrest Gump took Best Picture that year, and I think
still debated.
And I think if you dropped all three of those movies now, I think it would probably go more towards, at least according to IMDb and people on the internet, probably go to Shawshank, then maybe Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
Who knows? But
yeah, I think it's kind of one of those things where it's like in the moment, you can kind of see, trying to put yourself in 1994 shoes, you can see why Forrest Gump won. I think if you're looking at them retroactively now, I think Shawshank Redemption is the best of the three. But if all three were to drop this year as new movies, I feel like probably Pulp Fiction might win it, if that makes any sense. I know that's a nice way of like somehow giving all three of them credit, but I do think it's kind of true. I think in 1994, Americana, that kind of nostalgic movie, the decades that Forrest Gump is centered around, for a 1994 adult audience, it's like that's like the golden years. It's very nostalgic and full of historical references and music and stuff. So it's like, yeah, that one wins then. But Shawshank Redemption has this timeless quality about it that every time I start that movie over again and it's the first sort of overhead shot of the prison and you're hearing the music, it's just like you just kind of get this vibe like, you know, we say it a lot that the meme is like, this is cinema, but like you just get this like, oh, like filmmaking, like it's film, and you're about like ease yourself in for a journey you're about to take, because it's going to be sort of maybe not necessarily epic in scale, but epic in scope, so to speak.
Yeah.
And Pulp Fiction is just one of those that it's like, that's kind of the most hip of them. That's kind of the most cool. The sort of film bros, the film buffs, that's like, they like their edgy stuff and they like their sort of like, you know, too cool for school kind of style and whatever, the sort of edge to it. Mm-hmm. Pulp Fiction kind of checks all of those boxes for them. So, you know, the internet would pick Pulp Fiction as the best.
Yeah. And I think each one of those movies can teach a lot about cinema and the fundamentals and and you know the language of the camera movement and what things do. Shots, each one of them, you know, Pulp Fiction took away best screenplay, best original screenplay,
and it has an excellent, and it's certainly deserving of the screenplay because it's got a uniquely structured script, and it's so it's a 2.5 hour movie that's not plot free, but it's very dialogue driven. And if you were sort of one of these cutthroat editors and you were to be shown that movie, you would be like, what kind of assembly cut is this? What kind of a like leave every scene in the movie is this? Why do you got these people talking for 20 minutes? Like, get them through after 5 minutes of dialogue and get to the point. But it's like the whole point of Quentin Tarantino movies is to just marinate in that slow burn building of a tension, slow burn building of a relationship, slow burn building of a friendship, to pay off the big sort of action or twist that comes at the end of it, so that you're just completely invested.
Right. And here's my opinion of the three. Of the three, Forrest Gump, I believe, has the most evil villain of all of them. Jenny,
yeah, the unintentional, she,
not the warden, not the warden in Shawshank,
I mean,
and not the gimp from Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I mean, she's, you know, like, you know, she certainly, but I mean, you know, nowadays every villain has a sort of a dark past and a bad upbringing, like a sort of past wound that is the reason they're all evil. So Jenny kind of fits the modern day villain mold. You know, nowadays the sympathetic villain is in. So I mean, Jenny would almost be that. You know, it's an interesting thing. You know, she's you know, she's a very, very flawed human being. The film does kind of show the childhood trauma that leads to her being a very sort of flawed and damaged and messed up human being. I think a lot of people can relate to that. But yeah, in terms of Forrest's view of things, like, I think everyone but Forrest might be like, get this like toxic bad news girl away from Forrest Gump. He's too innocent. But you know, but it, like, at the same time though, like, I'm a sucker for a sentimental love story, especially when it's like the dude is literally too dumb to get a good girl, any kind of good girl, but like he kind of gets the girl of his dreams. It's the love of his life. You know, it's a sappy movie. I love Forrest Gump to death. I love it because it's full of so much history and music and pop culture and things like that. I like the history in it. For me, it's almost like a history lesson. It makes you nostalgic for a time that you weren't even alive for. So I really do like Forrest Gump. It's a good little like prelude. It's almost a prequel to the 90s themselves because it ends in the early 80s. You know,
it's very true.
And but yeah, I love Forrest Gump. I love Shawshank Redemption.
Forrest Gump.
Here in 2023, I'd say for me personally, I think Pulp Fiction is actually my least favorite. You ask me when I'm 15, 16, 17, Pulp Fiction is my favorite. But as an adult, I think Pulp Fiction probably gets number 3 for me.
Well, and that's because, and we'll talk about this later when we do our Quentin Tarantino movies, but I think my favorite Tarantino movie is going to be Inglourious Basterds, but that's for another time.
Yeah, that is for another time.
So anyways.
95.
Well, no, there's still more to talk about 94.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. The Lion King.
Mega year. So we had Lion King, which to me has Hans Zimmer's probably top 2-3 scores of all time. He won the Oscar for that one.
When I was like 13 and 14 and first started to kind of pay attention to the people the names of the directors and the names of the composers and all this stuff. I knew directors, but like I wasn't always paying attention to like who the cinematographer was, who the writer was, when I realized that like 2005-ish was like, you know, Hans Zimmer had done like the first Pirates of the Caribbean. He'd done Batman Begins. He'd done a couple of other things. And then when I also realized that he did The Lion King, which is a movie I watched a million times as a kid, my mind was so blown. I was like, what? I'm like, The Gladiator, King Arthur, Batman Begins, Pirates of the Caribbean, Hans Zimmer did The Lion King.
And
blew my mind.
And he won the Oscar for that.
And it's exceptional. The Lion King, I think, is sort of a pinnacle, at least for Western animation. I think it's got to be, in terms of the box office, it is the highest grossing, but I also think it's a pinnacle moment for like 2D Western animation cartoons. Like it is the sort of it is the AAA example.
So, yeah, we had The Lion King. Love that's probably my favorite Disney cartoon of the classics.
It's easily
anyways.
for me. I would say, bar any era or style, like I would have you like pick a Disney animated movie that you have to put at top. It's got to be The Lion King.
Now,
if it's Disney, it's The Lion King.
Challenge for the listeners: listen to the Lion King score, especially the main the main melody of it, whatever. When he's looking at his father in the sky, Mufasa, and all that stuff, and then go and listen to Black Panther's score. You're gonna find a lot of similarities there, a lot of inspirations, I think.
I hadn't even heard that before.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
maybe we'll have to
Yep. So
do
especially
some side by sides
especially
here.
when Chadwick Boseman's character, R.I.P., when he's in the
Sort of astral plane.
and
Okay.
he says to his father, "You were wrong," or whatever.
And he's sort of having a similar
that-
kind of scene.
Yep.
Huh.
That same. Go back and watch
Threading a
it.
needle of homage a little bit because it's a similar kind of scene, and
Yeah.
so maybe homage, maybe unintentionally inspired by
Yeah, it's specifically the music, and you'll hear it.
That's interesting.
Just a couple of quick mentions before we move on. The Crow, that's a solid movie for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, they've
But we
been
had
trying to remake it longer than they've ever spent making the actual movie. They've been
Yeah.
trying to remake it for 20 years.
James Cameron's True Lies.
True Lies was
True
94.
Lies
I
is
almost
amazing.
completely flew over that. True Lies, I think, generally speaking, I think, like, all things being equal, I think that's my favorite Arnold movie overall. Like, T2's awesome, like, is like, incredible, but, like, overall, like, Predator's also amazing, but, like, I think, like, I've taken the overall film and Arnold's overall performance. I think True Lies might be his best.
Dude, True Lies is hilarious.
Yeah,
it is so funny.
It's one of those that's like, I watched it first when I was so young that a lot of the humor kind of, you're just watching it as like an action movie, but it's like it has some great humor in it.
Yeah, and it goes without saying, Jamie Lee Curtis puts in a great performance.
Yeah, fantastic performance from Jamie Lee Curtis.
Anyways, we also have Speed. Speed
That was
is a
94.
staple action movie. Keanu Reeves.
Keanu Reeves.
Yep. And then I'll plug this one for me because I really like this one. Legends of the Fall with Brad Pitt, Anthony Hopkins.
Okay.
I think it won Best Cinematography that year. It's a very like one of those timey epics, like a Dances with Wolves type of feel.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very good one too. So those are kind of the big ones from '94 at least.
Yeah.
So on to '95. There was a few in '95 for sure. We could get into some of the Godzilla movies, but let's talk about David Fincher's Seven.
Yeah.
7 was 95.
That's a movie that 95 feels too soon for that movie. That movie still feels so relevant and modern in the way it's executed.
Right. That's a good one. What's in the Box? It's just a classic.
It's
at
still,
this point. Iconic.
That's the thing. If you were to tell someone that came out in like 1998 or 99, they'd probably believe you. Like it was ahead of the game,
and then
for sure.
We get Pixar, Toy Story. That's revolutionary.
Incredible. The first fully 3D CGI animated movie. That's the Snow White of a modern generation. When Snow White came out, they were saying, "Oh, well, you can't do a feature-length animated movie. That'll never work." And when Toy Story was made, they were the naysayers saying, "Well, this 3D animated stuff with the computer, like it's good for scenes or a niche thing or for characters. It can never sustain a whole film." And they did it, and it's incredible.
Yeah. Just to go over a couple quick ones, Species. I was a fan of that younger, and it's a very odd movie. It's a very weird sci-fi for sure, but it kind of had this weird horror thriller thing that was very unique. Not a lot of people were doing.
And it's got the H.R. Giger creature designs, and it's again, it kind of occupies that weird kind of like A-, B+ kind of creature feature movie where it's like, this script could have been sent in, and if it's picked up by the wrong TV station or the wrong, independent video label, it just becomes this like schlocky straight to video nonsense. But it's like but it's also not sort of put through the kind of filters of like, oh, this is some big AAA, vanilla blockbuster. It's like, it's this nice little spot where it's like, it's a studio movie and it's got production value and it's got, name actors like Ben Kingsley and Michael Madsen in it, and it's like an A production, but it's sort of this A- B+, like they're like go in on making the genre movie, and so it's like a good sci-fi, it's a great creature feature. the kind of thing you would think Paul Verhoeven should have directed, but he was
Right.
busy with another movie in 1995.
Which was
Showgirls.
Yeah, that's-
Notoriously
Yeah.
not a very great movie, or, I mean, depending on your taste, I suppose it's one of the greatest movies. I don't know, but it's kind of schlock, and it's kind of famous for very specific reasons. I don't think it had the intended effect that it did.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is an interesting film in that it's at the time and maybe still today the highest. It would the
Because they released
was
they released it as an
NC-17
NC-17 when many theaters
and had
would
the
not,
largest budget.
Yeah, when many theaters would not carry an NC-17
Right.
movie. So again, like it's, and here's the thing: if you do sit down and watch it, it's more than just the kind of, oh, it's nothing but nudity and stripping that it's kind of got the reputation for. It is trying to be more of a movie than that, but it's kind of weird tone and style where it's like. It's like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be like laughing at the movie or laughing with the movie, or is it so bad it's good, or is it just kind of bad? Is it kind of like, is it satire? Is it leaning into it? Because Paul Verhoeven has done some of that stuff that's worked very well. RoboCop, and then another movie we'll mention here soon. It's like, I don't think it quite, and Basic Instinct that we mentioned earlier, like he's got this tone and style that he nails. I don't think he quite got it for Showgirls.
Yeah, it's just interesting the fact that it's got the highest budget for I think an NC-17 movie.
Yeah.
But anyways, then we have a big huge flop that year in Waterworld.
Yeah.
And Kevin Costner was hot off of Dances with Wolves not too long before that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably part of the reason. I think after Dances with Wolves, he wrote his own ticket a little bit, and then it didn't go over well. So to the extent that almost, I remember growing up, like in the preteen and teenage years, anytime a movie was going to be a big flop or was a big disaster, everyone compared it to Waterworld. Like I knew more about that movie before I even saw it. I knew it was a disaster as far as the financials go.
And look, as a young kid seeing that movie, I still liked it.
It's very kind of like Mad Max on water kind of a thing. You know, that kind of like
it's a little
post-apocalyptic kind of wild sort of thing. You know, it's like, it's not my thing, but it's not my kind of movie, but like it's got its charm, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, and then we'll get into the epic that was successful that year, Braveheart.
Yes.
You know, talk about swords and sandals. That Braveheart has, to this day, one of the best soundtracks, the original soundtracks, I think, ever.
James Horner,
you know,
R.I.P.
Yeah, of course. Like, one of the best out there that at the time and always and forever, I think. It won Best Picture.
And I mean, Mel Gibson pulling double duty as the director and the star, because they would not, he was pursuing it as a director. They would not greenlight the movie unless he agreed to star in it. He knew that chronologically he was a little old to be playing William Wallace,
yep.
but he kind of, like, you kind of went with it, and it's incredible. I mean, he's directing the film, starring in the film, and it's this epic, you know, 5 years before something like Gladiator kind of puts that subgenre on the map for the new millennium. You know, again, talking about the sort of seeds planted in the 90s that are the progenitors of these other styles and subgenres. Braveheart kind of is that proto Gladiator, and for me personally, I'm more of a Braveheart guy than a Gladiator guy.
Yeah.
I think some of it comes down to, I tend to, I didn't really think about it, but I tend to like stuff that's a bit more AD as opposed to BC, you know?
That's interesting. Yeah, very interesting. I think I kind of agree with that. I am more of a Braveheart guy. I kind of like, they're both very similar stories. I mean,
yeah, and I'm not calling one bad and one good.
By no means. They both won Best Picture for a reason. You know, that's back when Hollywood was still getting it right. But anyways, Braveheart, epic, just amazing. It's a staple film for anybody.
And then we've got to mention, if we're on the topic of 95, we got to mention one of my favorite like good bad movies, B movies, I don't care what you want to call it, like tongue in cheek, whatever. Mortal Kombat. Yeah. Every 13-year-old in 1995 loved that movie, and like anyone, I still watch the movie, and it's just loaded with the aesthetics, the soundtrack, the editing. It's got such a fun energy to it. You can't watch that movie and like not have a pretty good time watching it. Like, it is just like, it's the definition of like an entertaining, fun movie. It's 100 minutes, breezy. So like, once you get to a certain point in the movie, I think 50% of the screen time is fight scenes. That's all set to like a cool soundtrack. Like, it is just like it's like half music video, half fight scenes. Like, it is just a fun movie to watch.
That's a good representation of like 90s.
It's
action.
very 90s. Yeah, it's so
incredible.
90s. It's very good.
Anything else from 95? I think we're good there.
Yeah, as far as the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie was 1995,
Power
which
Rangers.
for little kids, for like 3-year-old me,
that's awesome.
That's a big deal. That's another one that's like so 90s and so Power Rangers. It's like, it's basically a live action cartoon, but like The guy who plays Ivan Ooze in that movie though was hamming it up in like a really fun way.
Yeah.
Like he leans into it and it's like really entertaining. You know, it's like he kind of, you know, he knew the kind of they all knew what kind of movie they were making there, and it's like, yeah, it's fun. It's crap, but you know, it's like it's B movie, it's low tier, it's zany and wacky, but like it's a fun kind of entertaining zany and wacky.
Yeah, I agree with that. Moving on to 96. First one, right off the bat, Twister.
Oh,
Another
that's your first-
another special effects, you know,
Yeah.
kind of extravaganza type movie. Very like it's one of those movies where it's very fun.
And Bill Paxton,
Bill Paxton.
R.I.P. You know,
We love Bill Paxton.
I know, and overshadowed, I think, a little bit by Independence Day. Independence Day was
Yes.
sort of the bigger, supersized alien version of the kind of disaster movie Twister was. You know,
Yeah.
Roland Emmerich's kind of big splash. He'd done Stargate, I believe, as like
Yep.
a '94. So Stargate's another '94 movie. Again, the seeds being planted for these
Yeah.
directors that will have long careers and movies that influence for decades. And so Independence Day, huge one. Putting Will Smith on the map. After that, Will Smith was in 1.5 million blockbusters. Not that was his debut, but
But
sort
that's
of
what really
pushing him into
yeah.
blockbuster movies, you know, and building off of, you know, without Independence Day, Jeff Goldblum maybe doesn't get promoted from the cool supporting character to the lead in The Lost World. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like that stuff was going hand in hand. You know, Bill Pullman giving one of the greatest speeches of all time.
Cinema.
Yeah, it's like whether you could make a case of a reason of why you should hate everything about Independence Day, and maybe you could convince somebody. You can't convince anyone that that's not a good speech and that speech isn't awesome. It gets the blood flowing. That is the Independence Day movie.
Yeah.
How do you not watch that movie
Yeah.
on Independence Day? It's
Yeah.
too perfect.
And then we have another invasion movie, but totally different.
Yeah.
Mars Attacks.
Tim Burton's Mars Attacks.
His magnum opus.
Yeah, I know, right? Like infamous and famous for me as a kid because Godzilla makes a little bit of a cameo in that movie during
Yeah.
one of the montage scenes. They're showing all the destruction of the aliens, and then they show Godzilla stomping through a city using footage from Godzilla vs. Biollante, 1989. And then it turns out that the aliens are just watching that Godzilla movie on a TV, which I would like, for 4-year-old me, I'm like, that's the coolest thing ever. Like, oh, Godzilla was in the Mars Attacks movie, you know?
And obviously, as diehard Godzilla fans, there are many of the best Godzilla movies coming out in the 90s,
Yeah.
but we're kind of glossing over those
Yeah.
right now, talking mostly
Yeah,
just
there were
about...
a number of 90s Godzilla. Some of people's favorite Godzilla movies are in the 90s. 95 in particular, Godzilla vs. Destroyer. Excellent Godzilla movie.
Oh, fantastic.
Top 10, top 5. It's an excellent Godzilla movie.
Yeah, so moving on back to Hollywood anyways. Escape from LA, Kurt Russell. A lot of people love.
Was that 95? I always feel
No, it was
like
96.
Okay,
we're on
96.
96.
Thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. I was like, I always feel like it was 97, but 96, fair enough. And kind of the letdown compared to Escape from New York. But
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was thinking of Escape from, but we have the sequel, and it still feels very like 80s to me. You know, it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like it's in the 90s somewhere. I don't know. That's just me.
No, I think movies that are sort of set in the future age a little better than that. Like when you make contemporary set stuff, it's only going to age as well as the contemporary like of that time. Like you make a 90s movie in the 90s, it's going to feel like the 90s 10 years from now. If you're making something set in the future in the 90s, it's future proofed a little bit as long as you're not too close with your future prediction. I hate the movies that are set like 10 years in the future because it's like you are so
Right.
dating yourself.
You don't
Like
know what
you're
you're
not
doing.
gonna, you're 2001 and Blade Runner being set in 2017. It's like you are just asking to be lapped by
Right.
society.
The Rock.
96.
Michael Bay's The Rock.
Michael Bay, who would go on to have a crazy, awesome
Oh
career.
yeah, we gloss over his Bad Boys?
was Bad Boys was before The Rock.
I
Was
believe
it?
I believe it was.
Oh,
I'll have to
wow.
fact check myself real quick.
Yeah, let's fact check that. It wouldn't shock me because I think The Rock is a higher caliber of movie than Bad Boys, but
95 Bad Boys. Yeah.
Wow,
Because that's
sort
his
of.
first major motion picture. I
yeah,
think.
and Sean Connery's sort of last. You know, Sean Connery said as much to the director that for him, he was playing the character as if he was playing Bond. They do a lot of fun stuff with the script where, like, they imply that John Mason isn't his real name, that that he's got this shady, mysterious past, and, like, they do these little winks and nods. It's like, you can tell that Sean Connery's, like, he's basically playing old man, cool Bond in The Rock, and, like, for me, that's an unofficial James Bond movie.
Yeah. You get
Nicolas Cage being Nicolas Cage.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's so
Yeah.
good. Then you get the nice Schwarzenegger double feature of Jingle All the Way,
Jingle All the
and
Way.
and Eraser
Yeah.
of that year. You know, and Schwarzenegger in the 90s is just massive.
He was on, because, like, 80s was kind of his peak, and in the 90s he was trying to do the kind of, like, go from like the Schwarzenegger action movies of the 80s, your Conans, your Predators, your Commandos. He was trying to go into like the A-list blockbuster, you know, Terminator to Terminator 2. You know, Terminator is very 80s movies, and Terminator 2 is like your big 90s blockbuster. True Lies is cut from that cloth. He was trying to do that mainstream stuff with these other 90s movies, and Jingle All the Way, loved it as a 4-year-old.
It's turbo time.
I had a turbo guy. I had like the 12-inch figure of the turbo dude. And I always liked it as a kid because I recognized the kid from, you know, Jake Lloyd, who's Anakin in The Phantom Menace, was in Jingle All the Way. So like, you know, but like, that's not an easy rewatch.
It's really funny watching all the people just absolutely destroy themselves trying to get the toys. It's like, man, this is totally what Black Friday is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then, you know, we forgot to mention previously, Adam Sandler is big and comes in big, you know, with Billy Madison and all this. And then
Billy Madison or Happy Gilmore first?
I think Billy Madison came in and then Happy Gilmore. Okay. But I could be wrong.
Was Happy Gilmore 96?
Happy Gilmore's 96.
Then I want to say that Billy Madison was the later one.
Maybe, because then he establishes not long after that Happy Madison.
Yeah.
You know, we get Fargo. Another one.
Billy Madison was 95, and then Happy Gilmore was 96.
Right, yeah.
So there you go. One-two punch.
There's a lot of 90s movies we're going to miss.
Yeah, you're not going to get them all. We're trying to get some highlights here to just have the nostalgia trip and talk about the decade as a whole.
Our podcast will be probably 5 hours long. But one more big one I think I want to talk about, Mission Impossible, 1996.
Yeah, big. And here's the thing. If this were to be... When you have the context of what that movie did to the original... TV show. The original TV show was about the character. Can you give me the name of the character that John Voight plays in the movie? But he was the main character in the show.
Yes, it is going to be Jim Phelps.
So that was the main character of the show for season after season, played by, I think, Peter Graves. And when they gave him the script for the movie to have him return as the aged version of his character from the show, he was so off-put by it that he refused to star in it, hence why John Voight is playing the character of Jim Phelps in the Tom Cruise movie. And that's because they take the hero of the whole franchise up to that point, and, you know, they do a crazy twist with him. I don't know why we should be worried about spoilers, but, like, the kind of twist that if you were to do it in a... in a popular franchise movie here in the modern era, they would say that Hollywood absolutely ruined it and pissed on the legacy and did all of those things. So, but who else could pull it off rather than Tom Cruise? That shows how good of a great 90s action Mission Impossible movie he made, that like they screwed over the main character of the original show in his movie, and people still rolled with it. And now people don't even know that was ever a TV show. They only know the Tom Cruise franchise.
Yeah, and the cool thing about the first one is that now they've tied it back in kind of with some of the characters and the callbacks to the newer Mission Impossible movies. So
yeah, they've slowly, the Mission Impossible franchise went from being kind of a one-off series of films to now being a bit more unified and cohesive across. So like you have different things that are coming full circle. So now it's more of a saga as opposed to just a series of films.
Yeah, and if I think we can do a whole podcast about the Mission Impossible movies. Maybe we will.
We will one day.
Yeah, but for those of you who want to watch, I think you can always skip number 2 because like it's its own thing, but you should watch it because it is Mission Impossible 2, and it's kind of cool.
My OCD says you can't go from 1 to 3 because there's numbers in the names. If there was only subtitles, you could skip them. My OCD won't let me do that if there's a number in the title, so it's like you got to watch 1, 2, 3. You got to watch them all for me.
But you would say that it on the story character, it really has nothing to do with any of the other ones.
It's an off the beaten path entry in the narrative.
Crazy John Woo action.
Yeah, which I mean, it's kind of cool and insane and awesome in its own way in that regard. But
right.
Yeah.
Moving on. So 1997, and if there's movies that I'm forgetting, by all means. But 97.
Yeah, no. Once we get into more, shout out to 96 though. Dragonheart, love that movie.
Yes.
That's one of those movies where,
Dennis Quaid.
Say this, Dennis Quaid, awesome dude. Sean Connery as the dragon. For me, people, my dad knows Sean Connery as Bond. Like, I know Sean Connery as the voice of Draco. Like, that's all that I think of for Sean Connery. That's one of those movies that I affectionately say is like a 7 out of 10 movie with a 10 out of 10 ending. I don't know how you watch the whole movie of Dragonheart. You can criticize the whole movie as being kind of like, it's kind of Braveheart light. It's kind of like the not as A-list awesome. You know, it's like the mainstream Hollywood version of Braveheart for like 70% of the movie. But the ending of that movie is like so genuine in its emotion and so genuine in its
tearjerker.
message, and the musical track To the Stars by Randy Edelman is amazing. Like, it is so like wholesome and sincere, and it was very. I loved watching that movie as a kid, and I hated watching that movie as a kid because the ending was so sad but kind of uplifting.
Right. And
The ending is better than it has any right to be at the end of that very sort of standard, not necessarily amazing movie.
yeah, I agree. Love Dragonheart so much. Moving on, Con Air. Con Air's 97.
Nick, the first
Nicolas
time that
Cage.
like as a small kid, I'm like, what's up with that guy's hairline?
Yeah.
You know,
Why
like,
is he doing
yeah,
this?
like his hair is weird. Like, you don't think about this stuff when you're a kid, but like I just like Nicolas Cage for me in my mind is like him leaning and being like, put the bunny down, is like that is like etched in my brain. Like that's Nicolas Cage to
Yeah.
me. Con Air is Nicolas Cage. Like that's it. Same thing with like Steve Buscemi. I only think of him as like the creeper, from Con Air.
And then he ends up being a creeper again in Armageddon later on.
If everyone's wondering why I in particular have so many of these memories of these 90s movies that are not kids movies at all, I would often spend huge chunks of my summer vacation with like my splitting time between like my grandma and my aunt and uncle. And I had an older sibling and older cousins, and my aunt and uncle were on the younger side relative to us. So they would rent movies like crazy from Blockbuster. And so they would just put on whatever they wanted to watch. And if I was in the room and I wanted to sit and watch it and I wasn't too freaked out or too scared, or it wasn't something like nudity filled or something like that, I could just sit and watch it. So like, I wouldn't necessarily watch all of Con Air, but I would watch like huge portions of movies like Con Air, Scream. That's how I saw the original Scream. That was a VHS tape, 1996 Scream. And like, I'm like, that movie probably, like, I should not have been a 4 or 5 year old watching that movie, but like, I have the memories of it.
Well, and let's
you
be
know?
honest, every mom and dad or guardian or whatever you want to say out there, they're watching their movies and they're like, "Hey kid, get back in your bedroom." But then,
yeah, exactly.
no, okay, close your eyes, don't watch this, or
Exactly.
don't listen to that.
Exactly.
Every kid out
And
there
it's
ends up watching movies that they shouldn't.
And it's a very American thing of like, well, the violence and language isn't so bad as long as you know that stuff's not real and it's not good and not okay, but like, you better not watch any of the nudity.
Well, and that's a very American thing
Yeah.
too. Is we're all cool with the violence and the gore and the killing, but nudity is not okay.
Completely.
But then
Close your eyes.
But then everywhere else, it's the opposite. Like nudity is acceptable, and all the violence and stuff is more or less
is what
taboo.
freaks people out.
Right,
yeah.
right.
So it's interesting. But
And speaking of the violence, I remember Con Air, the part when the plane crashes or whatever, and the guy gets his arm ripped off because it was stuck and it was handcuffed.
Oof.
I always remember being freaked out by
I
that.
remember Dave Chappelle gets killed in that movie.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's so weird. It's one of those things where it's like there's nothing like funny about it, but in hindsight, it's very funny because it's like you don't expect to see that happen to Dave Chappelle.
And Dave Chappelle, big in the 90s. Loved
Yeah,
Dave Chappelle.
it'd be like if Jim Carrey was randomly in a movie where he was like a criminal that got like brutally killed. It's
Yeah.
like it doesn't feel right. Like
Right.
what is this?
It's very
off
weird.
brand. Yeah.
Speaking of Jim Carrey, Liar Liar. So
yeah.
he was still.
Was Anaconda 97?
It could be. I'd have to look it up. The Fifth Element.
That was 97. Ooh, dude.
Luc Besson's
Cool sci-fi movies that kind of flopped miserably in 97. Fifth Element and Starship Troopers again.
Starship. Yeah.
And I'm much more of a Starship Troopers guy than I am a Fifth Element guy.
We'll get to Starship Troopers there. We're saving the best for last.
Let's build up to it.
The Fifth Element, super cool movie. It holds up today. It's in a lot of people's like top favorite movies because it's just so stinking fun. And,
I
Bruce
don't rate
Willis,
it.
bless his heart, we love Bruce Willis.
Yeah.
It's sad to see him how he is nowadays.
Absolutely.
But Bruce Willis is just so good as an action.
He's such a good everyman action guy
Yes.
that it's like he feels tough. You buy him doing what he's doing, but he doesn't feel like, oh, he's a pretty guy or he's like ultra shredded like an Arnold. Like he feels
Right.
like a guy that like maybe a lot of the dads or the dudes in the audience could be like, that'd be me. I could pull that off.
I have that hairline.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
and also like Mia Jovovich, awesome
Yeah.
performance in The Fifth Element.
And I think, I think Bruce Willis, if I had to just like think about it right now, is very much like a older version, and I say older like as in 90s, 80s, early 2000s version of, and a more serious version of Chris Pratt. And that
A little bit.
he's a very everyman type of dude.
Charm,
he's an action.
yeah,
he's got charm, but he's more serious and he's more, a little bit more.
Yeah. He was first big on like some sitcom or something where it was like
moonlighting, something like that.
Something like that, where it was a much more comedic role.
Die Hard, he blew up, Die Hard,
and then Die Hard kind of made him like this sort of like mainstream kind of action.
Die Hard, and I think the first Die Hard was what, 80? I don't remember.
80. It was the director of Predator. Predator was 87, John McTiernan. So Die Hard, I think, would have predated that.
Yeah, because Die Hard 2, I think, is 91.
So 85, 86, or maybe 88, 89.
Anyways,
yes.
Late 80s, and then the Die Hard 2 and 3 were definitely in the 90s.
Yep.
For sure. Face Off. Face Off is so good.
John Travolta, Nick Cage, and John Woo, they're all cranked up to 11.
The three Johns.
That is just
you had the holy trinity of Johns in that one.
Yeah, well, it's Nicolas Cage.
Oh, Nicolas Cage. Yeah, I don't know where you got
know where you got the third. Maybe the cinematographer was named John or something.
I don't know.
But yeah, they're all dialed up to 11, and it's Nick Cage going to 11 playing like John Travolta. It's like them playing each other as each other, like imitating each other. It's like, it's bonkers, but like Face Off is wild.
Yeah, and another weird one, well, not weird, just kind of, you had the kind of more wild version of 007, with Tomorrow Never Dies.
Okay.
That was 97 as well. And I don't know if GoldenEye was...
GoldenEye was 95.
95, something like that.
And that's a very beloved Bond entry, and also an iconic 90s video game. Like, everything that I sort of like, the sort of image of what I think of as Bond, and the first thing that comes to my mind is like entirely based around like GoldenEye, that movie, and that video game. It's like, that's the crystallized sort of image in my head of like your typical prototypical Bond.
Yeah, Pierce Brosnan was on fire in the 90s, and he had the double feature that year with Tomorrow Never Dies and Dante's Peak. Dante's Peak has some amazing visual effects and miniature work that is just outstanding, even for today's
stuff that you would never even pick out as miniatures work.
Right. And you had like Volcano with Tommy Lee Jones the same year as well, which not as whatever,
sort
but
of created that like dual movies thing, which you'll see a couple of.
Spawn was 97.
Again, loved it as a kid, didn't really get it as a kid. A lot of it was kind of over my head, but it's like, CGI hasn't aged terribly well. It's kind of like, it's an oddity, it has its charm, but it's like, I don't like going back to visit Spawn very much.
One of my favorite movies of all time, not in my top 5 or whatever, but certainly close to my top 10, is LA Confidential. Guy Pearce, Russell Crowe.
Perpetually underrated Guy Pearce.
Yeah, always. The criminally underrated Guy Pearce. One of my favorite actors. Anything he's in, I'm like, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to watch this just because he's in it.
Yeah, Guy Pearce is cool.
That's a great, noir movie. Very, very good. Anyways.
We mentioned Anaconda, like, very good creature feature, like J-Lo being wild, John Voight doing his weird accent. That's a fun 90s creature feature monster movie.
Yeah, and I there are so many action movies I feel like that I could get into. Just like today we have action movies that are, there's so many Jason Statham movies out there. They're all kind of like the same, and there were so many.
He's a genre unto himself.
There were so many of those back then too. You
haven't mentioned a huge one from 97.
Help me out here. I can't do
The Lost World.
The Lost World. Well, we were getting there.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
I was gonna get it like The Jackal. Have you seen The Jackal?
No, I've not.
That's Richard Gere, and it is, to me, I remember so vividly. There's a scene, Jack Black is in this movie as well.
Okay, is it a serious movie?
It is very serious,
okay.
and it's very.
Okay, gotcha. Like nothing comedic about this movie.
No, the fact that Jack Black is in it that's why it's kind of interesting. And Richard Gere also plays the bad guy.
Okay.
And you have Bruce Willis I'm
hard
sorry.
to imagine.
Richard. No.
Yeah.
Switch it.
Oh,
Richard Gere is a good guy.
Yeah,
Bruce Willis is a bad guy.
Richard Gere is like intimidating villain. Like, I can't see it.
Yeah, no, you're right. So. Bruce Willis is the bad guy. It's a very cool dynamic, and there's a scene in The Jackal with Bruce Willis testing out a new gun.
Is that movie?
That is that movie.
Okay, I've seen.
Yeah,
I saw that scene on
people
TV.
People know that scene.
Yeah, I saw that scene on TV once, and it so messed me up because like I saw Jack Black, and then I see Bruce Willis, who's usually a good guy, like doing that to Jack Black. I was like so young, and I saw it on TV. Like, it messed me up, and then I never knew what movie to look up to find that scene.
Yeah, and I don't want to spoil it because it's actually kind of like one of those holy crap moments.
Yeah, it's
but he's testing out a new gun, and he's like, hey, hold up this pack of cigarettes, so let me test it out here. It's a good movie. It really is a good movie.
That's insane. Okay, so that's that movie. Okay, yeah, making discoveries here. I didn't know what that movie was. I didn't know where that scene came from.
Yeah, moving on. Men in Black.
That was 97.
97.
Yeah. Gosh, and also like shout out to Men in Black, like back when they could make like sub 90-minute awesome summer movies that were funny and loaded with effects and like high tier. Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith in that movie are like such a good duo. Like they bounce off each other so well. Like that is just like an excellent movie. It's a buddy cop movie. It's an alien movie. It's a comedy. It's like a sci-fi adventure. Like that's one of those like genre blenders.
I think it's timeless.
It's one of those genre blenders. It's just so much fun. The score for that, like you know that music, the iconic opening with the following the dragonfly rather through all the shots. Dun 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 dun. Like that's just an iconic movie. That's a minor masterpiece.
You'll have to help me out here because in 1997 we get Alien Resurrection.
Oh,
Was Alien 3 in the 90s?
Alien 3 was 92.
Yeah, see, we passed over that one. But, you
I
know,
mean,
for reasons, it's you either like it or you don't.
Yep. My favorite quote about making one of my favorite quotes about making movies comes from the making of documentary for Alien 3, where he says, on Alien 3, the problem was we weren't making a movie, we were making a release date. You know, they went through so many directors and so many script writers and so many iterations of things and even on-the-fly adjustments during production. And David Fincher kind of like disowns that movie.
Yeah.
And so, but, you know, I think Alien 3 is better than Alien Resurrection. Alien Resurrection is one of those things where it's like the pieces and the parts are all fun. You have like Brad Dourif, who voices Chucky, is like in a cool supporting role. Sigourney Weaver's kind of doing her thing.
Ron Perlman.
She never should have been brought back, but like she's there, she's doing it. Ron Perlman's awesome. Like the cast of characters, it's a version of that script was written by Joss Whedon, and it's sort of a proto Firefly kind of energy to that crew. So it's a very fun kind of sci-fi movie wrapped up in this really unnecessary, never should have been made Alien sequel.
Right, that's
you
true.
know.
Moving on to a much better movie. We'll go ahead because I think we'll save like the last two. I think are a couple of our favorites, but
we'll go on.
Let's talk about Titanic.
Yeah, December 97, technically like just barely a 1997 movie. Yep, and biggest movie of all time at the time, a record amount of nominations with 14. At the time, a record amount of wins of Oscars, tied with Ben-Hur with 11. You know, $1.8 billion. Back when the number 2 movie only made $900 million. Like to imagine Jurassic Park at $914-ish million before all the re-releases that pushed it over $1 billion. And then Titanic comes along. They thought it was going to be a disaster. It was a $100 million budgeted movie. Ended up going so far over budget. Went to $200 million. James Cameron said, "Screw my directing fee. I only want back end points." Bet his sort of stake in the movie. Essentially, the film doubles the Jurassic Park worldwide box office, $1.8 billion. They end up owing him insane amount of money on the back end of that. It's like the career move of a lifetime for him. And like an iconic movie, like Leonardo DiCaprio becomes an all-time star because of that movie, you know, just incredible. This 3-hour historical epic drama, and you know. Yeah,
I think it's, when people rank James Cameron movies, I think it actually deserves to be higher up than a lot of people kind of maybe give it credit for. Not to say any of his movies can be put anywhere because that's how good his filmography is.
I think because of the way his career has been spread thinly over so many years recently, a lot of the diehard Cameron fans are a little bit more fans because of the 80s and early 90s stuff.
Right.
So they view all of the like Titanic onward stuff like it's almost like that's not really real Cameron. Like 84 to 94 is like their Cameron, and then they don't really think of like the other stuff. And for me, being a little on the younger side, like yes, I grew up watching T2 like crazy. Grew up watching the original Terminator like crazy. But like for me, it's like I think of James Cameron. It's like I go to Titanic and Avatar, and I love those movies to death. They're great movies.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why it's so successful. Yeah, you can't say enough good things about Titanic. And here's the thing:
and when you go back and watch it, it's so well made.
Yeah,
and it recently dropped on 4K disc.
As of this recording, I believe it dropped yesterday.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to check it out. I haven't watched my copy yet, but from what I understand, it looks better than any 1997 movie has any right to look in terms of the sharpness and clarity. Yeah, and that's why I think James Cameron's movies are so awesome, is because he's always pioneering the tech. His technical standard is top of the line. He future-proofs his movies for decades to come. Yeah, you know, you look at the CGI liquid metal effects in Terminator 2, and they look better than like the Silver Surfer 16 years later in Fantastic Four 2. You know, it's like he knows how to do them. He pushes technology to new heights, but he always executes within the potential of what's possible in a way that holds up for years and years and years. There's maybe like one shot in Titanic that's a digital face replacement shot that kind of stands out when they're running down the the flooding hallway, and it's kind of Kate Winslet's face is a little like
Still.
but it's like for 1997 it's incredible, you know. It's like doing face replacements back then, like, you know, it's like such minor moments that have aged barely at all.
Yeah.
Aging at a third of the rate that other movies age at.
And Cameron is such a madman that when the 3D Blu-ray and their Blu-ray came out or whatever, you know, the one fan watched and said that, hey, your stars are
Neil
off.
deGrasse Tyson did
Yeah,
it.
that was him?
Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson tells this story about how he bugged James Cameron.
I
about
didn't
how-
know that was him.
Yeah.
I thought it was just some schmuck who's like, hey, yo.
He bugged James Cameron. Apparently, like, it was a bit of a running gag where he would bug him about, like, I guess he reached out to Cameron and was like, you know, like the stars, like we know what the starscape would have looked like on that night at that moment, and like that's all wrong. And Cameron said, you know, the film's made, you know, about $1.5 billion or $1.8 billion. He goes, imagine how much more it would have made if we got the stars right in that shot. And then so years later, when he went and he did the 3D re-release where he was, you know, touching up things like, oh, a boom mic's in the shot or the end of a set of a wall, doing the invisible touch-ups to kind of tweak the things you might notice in 3D. He calls Neil deGrasse Tyson up and says, like, I hear you've got a starscape that you want me to, you know, do you got a starscape for me that we can use? And so they put the more accurate one as it stands now as the one that's in the movie.
Yeah, I totally noticed.
Yeah, it makes the movie. The movie goes from a 9 to a 10 because of the better, more accurate starscape.
So, yeah, go see Titanic if you haven't seen it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, moving on. The Lost World, Jurassic Park.
Lost World.
This is special to me. It's not regarded as like the best Jurassic Park by any means.
And I think
for most of the people.
I think in fairness, most people wouldn't mention it as the best.
Right, yeah, I don't think but for me, and I know a lot of people our age, it's special because this is the movie, you know, I remember watching Jurassic Park before this. I was shown Jurassic Park on VHS way before this, and that's what got me into movies.
Yep.
You know, the magic of cinema, these dinosaurs are real, all that stuff. We talked about that in our episode 0 podcast.
The Brachiosaurus reveal is an iconic moment of cinema.
It's magic.
It's an iconic moment of
cinema.
cinema.
It's, for me, it's like my Star Wars, you know, the original trilogy. It's like my, you know, that's
it's
what
the
it is.
cinematic moon landing for our generation.
Right.
Like you see it and it's just mind-blowing.
That being my favorite movie, I'm into dinosaurs. I remember so vividly my dad carrying me from the car to the theater, covering my eyes, not letting me see. And then I remember so viscerally the smell of the popcorn. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm in the theater. And back then, you couldn't just watch a trailer for a movie on YouTube that was coming out. I had no clue.
You either saw previews on TV or you didn't know it was coming.
I think maybe, I can't remember, but I think maybe I knew that it was coming out and that it was a thing. But
yeah, as a kid, you don't keep track of that. That's your parents' job.
All you do is you go into Blockbuster and you see the covers of the movies that are already out, and maybe you hear about a new movie.
You catch a trailer attached to a VHS tape that you watched.
Or magazines.
Yeah,
magazines
exactly.
were big.
Yep.
So I watched that. So that holds a very special place in my heart. I just
it's the first movie we talked about this before. It's the first movie I remember standing in line for.
Yeah.
And it's our local theater that still exists to this day. And I just remember standing outside and it felt like we were just standing forever in the longest line, and it was hot. But then I remember like being in the darkness and seeing the movie on the big screen and like noticing things like the sort of oval sort of edit marker or sort of what is it, like not the tray, the real change that you see up in the corner of movies. Like I remember seeing that. Like there were so many things about seeing that movie on a big screen that like are crystallized in my mind about like what it's like to watch a movie in a theater.
Yeah. And I will say it's definitely not the best Jurassic Park. It's, you know, there's a lot of things to you know, kind of nitpick about it. However, I would say I'm a huge fan, especially as a Godzilla fan. I'm a huge fan of the final act that Spielberg threw in there.
The final act is sort of an amendment and an addition to the movie that's kind of disjointed from the main line of the movie, but it's an awesome final act.
And I gotta say, it gives us a better Jurassic World Dominion in that final act than a majority of the Jurassic World Dominion gave us.
Yeah.
And the fact that that's what everybody, I think we were hoping for is
that.
This isn't a review on Jurassic World Dominion, but it's like, look, you take us to this secluded place again. No, we want this in the mainland.
Give us the third act of The Lost World, the movie. You know, give us that for 90 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. It's a great third act. It's a little disjointed. Vince Vaughn in a cool kind of supporting role. Jeff Goldblum getting the call up to be the lead actor. Julianne Moore, like being 5 years old, that's got to be like the first time I ever saw Julianne Moore in anything.
But the VFX though were updated, and some still hold up today. I challenge anybody to watch, especially the third act where where Buck, the male T-Rex, is walking alongside the bus.
Yeah.
And
it's incredible.
He there's a scene where he bites the traffic light and he knocks the bus over and it runs into a video store anyways. And then you get the people running away screaming like, I came
there's Japanese men in suits that are running from the T-Rex as a clear visual homage to Godzilla.
Yeah, and then he eats the writer of the movie, David Koepp, I believe it was.
Yeah, it's either that or the writer of the book, Michael Crichton.
No, I think it's of the movie.
It's the screenplay. Okay, it's the scriptwriter. Okay.
Yeah, and his role is credited as Unlucky Bastard, I believe it is. And
it's a bonkers awesome third act.
But that VFX work is incredible. Like in that scene specifically, it just. Anyways, I could gush about it all day long.
No, it's good. And here's the thing: plenty of people would not necessarily list it as the second best Jurassic Park movie after the original, but you could 100% make that case and have two legs to stand on. You can absolutely argue that it's better than the entire Jurassic World trilogy, and it's a totally you can make that case. I might put just the first Jurassic World over it.
Ever so slightly, sure.
Just it checks boxes in a different way. It's a different kind of movie, but it's certainly, and over time, the newer Jurassic World movies are a fraction of the age, but they've almost aged a little harsher than a movie that is from 1997.
Right. Moving on, and I think one of our favorites of all time, Starship Troopers.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's another one that was a VHS view for me, and just kind of the sort of way that movie was put together, it blew my mind because I watched a lot of RoboCop on VHS as a kid, and Starship Troopers has the same director, writer, composer, director of photography as RoboCop. They're twin films in that way, and they're also similar in their editing style, how they use these breaks for commercial breaks and media breaks to kind of paint the world that they're living in. So it's this crazy wild movie, but it was so violent and presented sort of sci-fi warfare in such a bloody and violent way that was just mind-blowing to me at the age that I saw it, which admittedly was maybe 6 years old, way too young to be seeing it, but etched in my mind, stayed in my mind. And then it was always one of those that whenever I saw it on TV, I had to watch it, one of those sort of DVD Christmas list movies. And then when I made the switch to Blu-ray, it's one that's gone from DVD to Blu-ray to 4K. I've kept it in the collection.
I think it's like many of the Paul Verhoeven movies, it is multi-layered in that it works just as an action movie. Yeah. It works as just pure satire. I adore that movie. It is so fun. It is so visceral.
Yeah.
And it's it has commentary. It has everything you want. And I think clearly, the audience didn't really get the full message at the time.
It's a very satirical movie, and people thought that it was being played completely straight. And it's kind of fun because as the meme is sort of played straight, I'm doing my part, and
Would you like to know more?
Exactly, the only good bug is a dead bug. It's this great kind of it threads this needle kind of perfectly, where it's it doesn't feel corny and cheesy and chintzy, and it doesn't feel like it's it kind of just, it's this perfect blend of satire, but you can kind of get behind what the movie is on its own terms too. It's an awesome sci-fi action movie.
Some of the space scenes are a little shoddy VFX wise, but the bugs and some of the scenes VFX,
the bugs have aged very well.
Was $100 million budget, I believe, which
something
is crazy
like that.
at the time.
In 97 for an R-rated movie, that was a big bet to take. And Paul Verhoeven also RoboCop, but also Total Recall, which I believe was another 90s one, and an Arnold one too. Total Recall, and for a lot of people, the way we're gushing over Starship Troopers, they put Total Recall on that level. For me, I'm just more of a Starship Troopers guy.
Same.
I'm more of a Starship Troopers over Aliens kind of guy. I'm a bit more of a RoboCop over the original Terminator kind of guy. Those type of Paul Verhoeven movies are definitely my jam. Starship Troopers is just awesome. Got a great musical score, great visual effects, great sci-fi war. It's very proto Halo. You can't play the original Halo coming out 4 years after Starship Troopers and not say that there wasn't vibes of that carried over. Yeah. Starship Troopers is great. Don't watch any of the sequels. They're not really worth it, but the movie's great.
Yeah. So I we'll move on to 1998. I don't think there's a whole lot left in 97, but
we've said it all.
There's
97 was a key year, clearly.
Yeah, for sure. So 98, I want to start off with a bang here. Is Godzilla 1998.
Yeah, the big sort of misfire, like an iconic experience, iconic marketing campaign, but really such a golden opportunity to, could you imagine a Godzilla movie from the director of Independence Day? Like a Godzilla movie coming out. Independence Day was, when it was released, was the number 2 movie of all time after Jurassic Park. And, by 98, it had dropped to number 3 because of Titanic. But could you imagine a Godzilla movie coming out and performing on that level? Like, if it checked every box and hit the way Independence Day hit, like they clearly wanted it to.
Right.
A Godzilla movie, like, being an all-time great box office performer. Like, that's what they were going for. That's why they let Roland Emmerich write his own check and just let him have at it. Their big mistake was that Roland Emmerich was not a Godzilla fan. He didn't give a F. He basically made something that was more like a remake of Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Just made something that was very not true to the spirit and style of Godzilla. So it's kind of this kind of misfire of a movie. It stands better now, years and years later, as a 90s oddity. But like at the time when it's like the future of Godzilla in Hollywood kind of rests on this big opportunity, huge misfire.
Yeah, and it's a very fun creature feature and giant monster movie for sure.
Yeah,
and it's a special movie for me because at the time we're young, we watch it, we love it. We grow up and hear all the negativity surrounding it, and we're like, oh no, you're right, it is a bad movie. But then the beautiful thing happens, Chris. We get older and our tastes change and they finally kind of come into this where I think they're probably going to be.
Yeah.
And I'm
Screw
like,
you don't tell me that I didn't like that movie.
It's like, you know what? I really do like this movie a lot still.
And again, it's a time heals all wound thing. I remember the cartoon spin-off that followed that was great. I remember as a kid just thinking like, oh, well, Godzilla just looks really different. Why does he lay eggs? Well, like he had one egg that hatched in the old movies, but like now he's laying like 100. Like it was just, as a kid, you kind of just accept different things. It was just like, well, this is the American movie, so it's just really different. But time heals all wounds. When that's the last Godzilla movie you think you might get, and not that we were thinking this in 98. We were 6 years old. This isn't what we were thinking in 98. But in terms of the fan base, when that was like the big Hollywood opportunity for Godzilla, and then, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, Godzilla never got another crack in Hollywood. You just think like, wow, they had their shot there. It was as mainstream could be in terms of a Godzilla Hollywood movie, and they totally kind of crapped the bed. So it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth. But it's like now we've got the MonsterVerse. We're multiple generations of Godzilla movies beyond it. Now it's just an oddity. In the same way that All Monsters Attack / Godzilla's Revenge is like a weird oddity from the 60s or any of those like cheap Godzilla films from the 60s like Godzilla vs. Megalon, like it's just an oddity of the franchise where it's like, that's a really weird one that's off. It didn't really do what it was supposed to do, but it's just part of the tapestry now.
Yeah, and by no means is this like revisionist history.
No.
I'm not going to tell you, oh yeah, it's a fantastic, amazing flick, but it is for me though, in the sense that, subjectively, how we review movies as like an experience, it is, very, very fun. And
here's the thing. The worst things about it are no longer really sort of relevant. The sort of like, oh, Hollywood screwed it up. Well, Hollywood's done it better since. Oh, it was such a missed opportunity. Well, Godzilla's done fine since. Like, all the worst things about it have been sort of corrected and rebounded. So it's like the lasting negativity of it didn't have a lasting impression. So it's like now you can just enjoy the stuff that it kind of did all right.
Right. Moving on, cartoon here, one of my favorites of all time. And I think, we might, if people are listening and they're like, oh, wow, they didn't talk about this one or that one. Doesn't matter. This is our 1990s list. The Prince of Egypt.
Oh my gosh, I don't even think of that as a cartoon or an animated movie.
Right.
That movie I went with my aunt and to that movie in theaters again.
Because you had Mulan the same year.
And Mulan was great too. Mulan's very good. I think as much as I like The Lion King and The Circle of Life's probably my favorite Disney song, and not that I'm some Disney person, I'm not like big hardcore on it, but like Make a Man Out of You from Mulan, like that is a workout song. Like you can totally jam out of that song. That song will get you going. Sorry, it's good. It's a jam. But The Prince of Egypt was as a 6-year-old in the theater you're watching it, and it feels so, you feel the weight and the power of what you're seeing on screen in a way that like even if you don't fully grasp everything that's being explained or going on, it captures you. Like it's pure magic.
Yeah, and the music in The Prince of Egypt,
beautiful.
The songs are absolutely incredible. Val Kilmer is
the animation is amazing. Val Kilmer's performance, the entire cast absolutely kills it. it's an amazing animated film. Deserved to make 8 times as much as it made, for sure.
Yeah, it's and I think Spielberg produced it, but it did win the Oscar for best original song
Gosh, it could have.
for "When You Believe."
Yeah.
Remember that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, Prince of Egypt, big shout.
Great movie.
Comedies, The Rush Hour. We had
Oh,
the first
I was wondering-
Rush Hour.
I was wondering
Sorry,
when the
it's
first-
not the Rush Hour. It's just Rush
I was
Hour.
wondering when the first Rush Hour would come. That's when my dad took me to theaters to see, and me and my older brother, and it's such a good time. It's a buddy cop movie, but for the '90s era.
Yeah.
It's such a good time, such a fun time. Like Jackie Chan, Chris Tucker. Like it's just like.
I was
know.
a huge Jackie Chan fan already.
Yeah,
we didn't talk about this, but again, a lot of what influences you growing up is, what do your parents show you? And my dad and I, we were huge into Jackie Chan because he does all his own stunts. We would, No More Nice Guy or whatever it was called, Operation Condor. It's just, there's so many Jackie Chan flicks. I can't even name them all anyways, but yeah, love Jackie Chan.
Yeah, Rush Hour is great. Love it.
Waterboy.
Waterboy, oh my gosh, talk about an iconic Adam Sandler movie. Also shout out to Lost in Space. Like that's one of those movies that, like, as a 6-year-old, that felt like awesome, epic sci-fi amazingness. It's like it hasn't aged incredibly well, but Lost in Space is like a fun little sci-fi movie. I'm not judging it as a fan of the original series or anything, but like as a sci-fi one-off, it was a pretty darn cool movie.
Right, and Adam Sandler being one of the comedians at the time, just absolutely destroying the 90s. It was a double year for him. He had Waterboy and The Wedding Singer.
Wow, and The Wedding Singer,
not as big,
I don't
but
know if it was a hit or a bomb at the time, or if people hated it. But I remember, like, in my house when we were watching, like, Billy Madison, Happy Gilmore were very watched VHS tapes. Waterboy was very watched VHS tapes. Like, I don't know if we ever even, like, Wedding Singer was just, like, not in that cycle. Like, we were not on board with that.
Right, but it was the first of the unofficial, like, Adam Sandler, Drew Barrymore trilogy. You had that one in the 51st Dates, and then I think Blended.
Yeah.
But anyways, next I want to do the double disaster feature here. We have Deep Impact and Armageddon.
Yep. And, it's one of those things where it's like most people kind of skew towards Deep Impact being the better overall balanced movie, but Armageddon's the icon.
Yeah, that is like one of the quintessential guilty pleasure movies.
And Michael Bay, you've got Billy Bob Thornton, Steve Buscemi, like the cast is just like super fun. Liv Tyler, you've got Aerosmith on the soundtrack, Don't Want to Miss a Thing. Like that was the jam.
Yeah.
Like that was the
Iconic.
like epic love, loss, tragedy song. Like Bruce Willis, Ben Affleck, like that movie. Like I remember that movie. Like it felt like a huge big deal as a little kid. Like, oh, that's a movie like Armageddon.
Yeah, and we're not here to debate. It wouldn't have been smarter for astronauts to learn how to drill rather than drillers to learn how to be astronauts?
Yeah.
Sure,
Yeah.
You're right. It is stupid.
God bless Ben Affleck and him criticizing the movie, but
It's stupid. But here's the thing, though. It's just a fun movie. Like, give me a break.
Yeah.
And not to mention, it's one of those few movies.
They wouldn't be in over their heads if they were astronauts learning how to drill.
Yeah, come on.
That's the whole angle of it. It's the underdog kind of story wrapped up in an epic. Like, and I remember as a kid, you take all those movies way more serious than they are. Like, it's called Armageddon. Like, you ask someone, what does that mean? It's like, oh, that's the end of the world. I'm like, oh my gosh, this movie's so serious and so dramatic. But it's like, it's not as like it's got its own sense of humor. It's a Michael Bay movie. It's not like
Right. But, it's one of the few movies that even sometimes today, along with The Lion King, it's a tearjerker. Like that scene,
yeah.
You know the one I'm talking about? It kind of gets me every time, especially now that, that I'm a father. It, you can relate a little bit more having to just say goodbye and to break that promise. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
It's so good. Another one I want to mention, Mighty Joe Young. That was 98. That was kind of an interesting flick.
Yeah.
A very weird, like, practical effects kind of deal.
And one of those that was sort of, because the Godzilla 1998 was gestating for a number of years, so it was kind of creating this momentum of like, oh, we're going to bring back all these classic creatures, like, oh, Columbia TriStar is doing Godzilla. Oh, well, we'll King Kong was getting cooked up at Universal with Peter Jackson. That movie never happened, but that was coming along. And there's a movie coming out when we get to 1999 that they say was essentially the exact kind of tone that the 1998 Peter Jackson King Kong movie would have had. never got made.
Right.
And Mighty Joe Young was like another part of all of that. And so, but it was like, it's clearly like a cheaper one, not as crazy. It, again, felt like a bigger deal as a kid than it was. And then like, it just kind of always like underwhelmed when you finally saw it a little bit.
Yeah,
But
and then cartoons, to Bug's Life. But anyways,
Bug's Life's good.
and
I mean, Pixar doing their thing. You know?
Yeah. I think that's pretty much it for 98. We'll move on to 99.
Little horror shout out, Halloween H2O. I remember that was like, it's weird because like the Waterboy came out that year, and like there's all these like jokes about H2O and Waterboy. Like, so like 6-year-old me, that's me understanding what H2O means, water, and then like Halloween H2O comes out, I'm like, huh? And then like, they'd always say Halloween H2O 20 years later. It's like, so exactly what, the abbreviation thing was very big, like around this time. Like Independence Day was abbreviated as ID4, and like Halloween 20 years later was just called H2O, but then they would call it Halloween H2O. It's like, so it's Halloween, 2O. Like, so it's just like, they liked their sort of like, the marketing gimmick was like, MI2, they really liked their T2 and all that stuff. Like, they were into that like 3-syllable, 3 acronym kind of things, but just wanted to shout out Halloween H2O as like a horror junkie. And Bride of Chucky. Sorry, 1998 Bride of Chucky.
Yeah.
That movie's like kind of like this perfect blend of like horror comedy, like Brad Dourif, Jennifer Tilly, like they kill in that movie. Like that's a fun time at the movies. You don't need to see any other Chucky movie for that, but gotta shout out Bride of Chucky. Sorry.
No, we're good. 1999. Start off with Sleepy Hollow.
Yeah, there we go. Johnny Depp. I remember. Again, that movie seemed so grisly when I was young, and it seems so much more horrifying when I was young, and it's a little bit more of a black comedy. And from Casper 1995, shout out. I like growing up as a little guy in the 90s, I like totally crushed on Christina Ricci, and like I thought she was like the cutest girl ever in Casper, and then she's also in Sleepy Hollow, so like I was totally crushing on her for like, until I was like 10 years old.
For sure. We had The Mummy.
Yeah, The Mummy, and that's the movie that Peter Jackson pretty much said, like, if I'd got to make my late 90s King Kong movie, it would have been very much like The Mummy.
The Mummy.
Dude, The Mummy is bringing Stephen Sommers into this. We mentioned Deep Rising as a creature feature. He did the 90s Jungle Book live action remake, which was also solid, but, like, Stephen Sommers, The Mummy put him on the map. Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz. Fraser. Okay. Either way, he's awesome. But like, The Mummy is like a relentlessly entertaining movie. It's got these Indiana Jones vibes to it. It's kind of horror, kind of comedy. Like, there are so many great scenes and moments in The Mummy. Dude, we got to buckle up because 1999 is absolutely loaded to the brim.
Yeah.
Like, The Iron Giant, as
I
far
was
as
going to
animated
say that
movies
next.
go.
The Iron Giant.
The Iron Giant. Vin Diesel's brilliant Oscar-worthy
Yeah.
performance as the Iron Giant. Can I tell you, have I ever told you the Kevin Smith, Vin Diesel, Iron Giant story that I heard?
I don't know.
All right, so Kevin Smith has done a bajillion and a half podcasts. All right, so he's telling this story about how he's visiting when they're doing the recording session for Vin Diesel for the Iron Giant, and he's got these lines to read: rock, tree, and he reads it just like that: rock, tree. And then the director's like, all right, Vin. And he's like, and he gives him all this direction of like exactly how he wants him to deliver these lines. And then Vin Diesel, in exactly the same kind of way, he goes, rock, tree. And then Vin Diesel has the audacity to be like, that's the one, in confidence after saying it exactly the same way.
Cut the check.
But Iron Giant, brilliant animated movie, awesome animated movie.
Yeah, another one. Deep Blue Sea. One of
Sea.
your favorites for sure.
My favorite shark movie. Yes,
outside of Jaws.
Dude, for me, even above Jaws. Like, Jaws is the better movie, better film. Deep Blue Sea is the better good time. Sam Jackson.
The better ride.
LL Cool J.
I don't know, though.
Thomas Jane. Like, oh my gosh. Like, Deep Blue Sea is like everything I love about Jaws and everything I love about Jurassic Park wrapped up into like an awesome movie with an LL Cool J song at the end. Love it.
Yeah. Moving on. A quick shout out for Virus. Virus is a weird one with Jamie Lee Curtis is stuck on a boat. It's a very like kind of graphic, like tech kind of thing. The VFX work on that, amazing. Check that out. But the one I really want to talk about, there's a couple more. The Matrix.
Oh, The Matrix is an icon. Insane like blend of genres. It's a dystopian sci-fi and a martial arts movie and a gun fu movie and kind of a conspiracy twist movie, and all at once. Epic action movie, epic genre blender, cyberpunk. It
revolutionary.
It wraps it all up at once. It deserves a whole episode on its own. Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, revolutionary visual effects, brought Star Wars back for the new millennium.
Crazy time. Crazy time. For...
Fight Club was 1999. Edward Norton, Brad Pitt, killing it. David Fincher. No 15-year-old watches Fight Club and thinks it's not the greatest movie of all time.
Yeah, everybody goes through, we talked about that before. Everybody goes through that time when they think Fight Club is the best movie.
Absolutely.
Well, at least every young man does.
Yeah, somewhere between 15 and 20, you watch Fight Club and you think it's the best movie ever made.
Changing. Shout out to The Haunting.
The Haunting was 99. Saw that movie in theaters. Crazy, super dark movie. Liam Neeson, before I really knew who Liam Neeson was.
Let me think. I think Night at the Roxbury was 99.
Oh, really?
Or was that 98?
It could have been.
I don't know. There's a lot of good.
Night at the Roxbury was fun. Bicentennial Man was 99.
Man,
Very good. Robin Williams, excellent.
I'm saving one for last.
Okay,
so
it's kind of a twofer. Yeah, no problem.
So you gotta. I don't know if there's any more 99 that we're missing. I'm sure there's a lot.
Oh, 99 was a notoriously good year, so I'm sure we're just tripping over our words here.
Shout out to the movie Existenz. Did you ever see Existenz?
Yeah, kind of a weird one.
Or
kind of a weird one.
Existenz.
Yeah.
Jennifer Jason Leigh and what's his name? That's a good one. Jude Law.
Yeah,
Willem Dafoe is in that too.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Big Daddy was 99.
Yeah, there's
another Adam Sandler
here's the
movie.
thing.
Superstar. Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Here's the
that's
thing.
interesting.
There's many action movies that, and comedies. Comedies were so good back then, and not to say they're not good now.
Was American Pie maybe 1999?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up.
Wow, maybe somewhere around there. Entrapment with Sean Connery. I remember that, like when she's
American Pie was 99.
Yeah, and I remember her going under like the laser thing. Like that's all I remember about that movie. Even as a kid, like her going under like the laser sensor thing was from Entrapment.
Yeah. So I don't know if we want to round it out with one of our favorites. Just so we're good on time here. One of my all-time favorites, and I can remember so clearly pre-ordering this VHS from Blockbuster, which was like, or a DVD. No, I'm sorry. Pre-ordered the DVD after this came out. But it's kind of like, I don't know if this is like cheating because it's 99 and then also,
Yeah, it was 99, December 99 in Japan, technically August of 2000 for us.
But I think we'll count it. We'll count
it on a technicality, and then we'll talk about it again until we talk about it twice.
Godzilla 2000.
Godzilla 2000. Just fantastic movie. Especially in one of the few cases where I would hands down argue for the US version of the movie over the Japanese version of the movie, specifically because all the enhancements they make to the sound design, all the enhancements they make to the musical score, and the 10 minutes that they shake out of the movie when they edit it streamlines the movie. One of my favorite quotes about editing of all time comes from the audio commentary of Godzilla 2000. You can shake a movie and 10 minutes will fall out. I say it all the time.
Yeah.
And it's totally true. Godzilla 2000 American version is like one of the best Godzilla movies.
Yeah, I think that statement is true for pretty much every movie.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah.
The thesis being that you can trim scenes without removing entire scenes. If you just trim enough scenes across the length of the movie, you can lose 10 minutes without really cutting any whole scenes.
Yeah, that movie was huge for me because at that age, pretty much every movie you watch it can be immensely influential. But again, I remember pre-ordering the DVD from Blockbuster for like $24, which is hefty back then. And
I was fortunate enough to be taken with my cousin by my mom to see it in
I think I saw it with my dad and at our local theater, and man, just what a time. It's a good time to be a Godzilla fan now, for sure. Like with everything that's going on.
We were really happy for what we got back then, though.
Yeah, we hadn't experienced.
We didn't get a lot.
We hadn't experienced the drought yet post 2004.
Yeah.
So to speak. So,
and that was real Godzilla. That was Toho Godzilla for the first time for us.
Yeah, that was monumental. They're like, here, we saw what you did in last year, and we're going to give you something a little bit better.
Exactly.
So I don't know. Is there anything else I'm kind of missing? I mean, like, there's a lot of action movies. There's a lot of comedies. There's a lot of everything. I mean, the 90s gave us...
99 has Galaxy Quest, which is like one of the best.
Galaxy
one
Quest.
Of the best Star Trek one of the best Star Trek movies. It's not even a Star Trek movie,
Yeah.
99 was jam packed, and
Alan Rickman.
And a lot of these films, these heavy CGI films, are, as we move on, we'll talk about how they bleed into the 2000s. So we're not just cutting 99 short, but the sort of legacy of a lot of these 1999 movies is felt in the next decade. They spill right over, and the influence carries on.
Yeah, man, the 90s, very, I think, you could just kind of say, well, obviously it's influential to movies now, but When you look back at the 90s to the 2000s, 2010s, we've talked about this before, and we're kind of running out of time here, but the 90s kind of defined a whole part of the 2000s, and so did the early 2000s.
There's a whole generation. I mean, which filmmakers did we mention? The Roland Emmerichs, the Stephen Sommers, that they come on, and then you see them kind of define the next decade of cinema. The Michael Bays, you know, things like that.
Right, and then in the way that movies in the 2010s and 20s now, they just feel like moderately updated versions of like early 2000s movies and 1990 movies. They don't feel like, this doesn't necessarily feel like a different decade now. It feels like, iterative improvements or whatever.
Yeah, revisions. Because like you look at the 80s versus the 90s, and it feels like there are two different stratospheres of types of movies. But then you look at the 90s versus the 2000s, like 80s versus 90s, and as opposed to 90s versus 2000s, like 80s and 90s feel so separated, but the 90s and 2000s feel so connected and similar.
Especially like the late 90s into the early 2000s feels like a very...
It bleeds right over.
And it's probably because of the technology and everything that came during that time, but it feels like this is when movies kind of, I don't want to say stopped evolving,
but
because
they sort of reached a kind of final form, and it's just been sort of minor revisions since.
Right.
Better CGI, more superheroes, less superheroes,
but still the same type.
A lot of the same. The language, the cinematic language is still really much the same. The tones and stuff, it feels sort of extrapolations.
Yeah, so you can ascribe any kind of influence from any type of, or any decade really, to like modern cinema, certainly, but it feels like the 90s peaked, and then it was a slow evolution after that.
They laid a new foundation with the dawn of the technology and the dawn of the styles and the types of movies that were the big headliners, sort of prioritizing concept over stars necessarily. Not that stars didn't still exist, but your Independence Day could be the star. The Jurassic Park could be the star. It didn't have to have Arnold or Sly or someone selling it. You still had star power, but it's like the concept, the Men in Black, the concept feel like it could completely Armageddon. Like the concept was amazing and awesome and top lining, whether you had A-list stars to sell it or not.
Right. Yeah. So we are children of the 90s. We absolutely love the 90s film.
That's the title of the episode.
Yeah.
Children of the 90s.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty much going to cover it. Sorry if we missed your favorite movie of the 90s, but I'm sure we at least covered some of them.
Drop it in the comments.
Yeah, let us know what your favorite movies of the 90s were, if you were even alive back then. Who knows?
And if you weren't, hopefully this episode will point you in some directions. Do some cinematic archaeology. Find some of these 90s gems. You will have a good time, believe me.
Hopefully it can change you.
Extend your patience a little bit. I know these are movies that are, oh, dear Lord, 3 decades old. Give them a try. Find a DVD, find a Blu-ray, find a 4K disc. You're going to have a good time.
Yeah, certainly the 4Ks being released now of those movies in the 90s. They look incredible.
Absolutely. Still shot on film.
Right, yeah. You're still getting those. I think it's probably going to be probably the best looking, because you're still 100%. Shot on film, and it's like the height of that technology.
And from what I understand, the way that they can scan that film, it truly is at like a better sharpness and clarity than they were even able to be properly presented back then in theaters on celluloid.
Right.
So.
As far as film looks go, you get your digital stuff now. But I think that's going to pretty much cover it for this episode. This has been episode 1, our first kind of official episode, so to speak.
Yeah,
even though we gave you
laying down the style and the structure a little bit.
I'm sure we'll dive into the movies of the 2000s next, and then soon after that, we'll give you our favorite movies of 2023. Still have to wait till the end of December for that, because there could be a couple movies coming out that might be pretty good. Who knows?
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm your host, Jesse, and thanks for listening, guys.
Yep, I'm Chris. As always, have a good one.
See ya.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are tonight's entertainment.
You are not in Kansas anymore. You are on Pandora.
No, I'm simply saying that life finds a way.